Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
The workday started at 0400 hours. Brian had just gone to bed after a nightclub party with his friends. These two were as different as heaven and earth, day and night, fire and water. It was hard to imagine people more different from each other than the handsome Major Brian Alex and the simple milkmaid Vivian Pavlova. If someone had told them that one day they would become husband and wife, both would have laughed in the interlocutor's face. It was the most ridiculous thing imaginable, and yet one day it did happen. Vivian was born into a simple family. Her mother was a clerk in the only grocery store in the village. Her father was a tractor driver. Besides Vivian, there were 3 other children in the family. They lived poorly, but friendly and cheerful. The older ones looked after the younger ones. The younger ones without any objection to wear the older ones' clothes and use their school books. Everyone loved each other very much, and in their big noisy family there was a constant ring of happy children's laughter and the lively voices of the parents. When the little girl was 4 years old, a great misfortune happened. The parents were killed in an accident. In an instant, the children were left orphans. More than anything else in the world, the boys were afraid that they would be separated, scattered in different orphanages. But fortunately, this did not happen. All 4 of them were taken in by their aunt, their father's sister, a withdrawn and gloomy childless widow living in a neighboring village. But was it fortunate? The aunt turned out to be unkind and silent. She never once hugged her nephews, kissed them, or said a kind word to them. She constantly burdened them with housework. The brothers looked after the livestock, and Vivian and little sister kept the house clean and tidy. Already at the age of 5, Vivian was quite an independent child. She could milk goats, feed chickens, geese, rabbits, cook simple dishes, laundry, wash floors, sew buttons. But more than anything else in the world, the girl adored cows. They seemed to her the most beautiful creatures in the world. When you grow up, you'll be a milkmaid, the aunt decided. The older brother stood up for his little sister. Maybe she'll want to study something else after school, go to college, get a serious profession, be a paramedic, nurse or teacher. But the aunt only shook her head. Who needs it? This study of yours. Wasting time over books and ruining your eyesight. She'll go blind, and milkmaids earn good money. You don't have to be an expert. True, despite the fact that her aunt did not approve of sitting at books, Vivian still liked to read. Even before she went to 1st grade, her elders taught her the alphabet and taught her how to put letters into words. A whole new, wonderful world opened up for the girl. She began to run to the village library and borrow different children's books. In order not to be scolded by her aunt, the girl hid the books under her pillow and read them furtively at night, with a flashlight under the blanket. She did well in school, but not brilliantly. Not because she didn't understand the material, but because she didn't have time to study. There was too much homework, and if she had a free moment, Vivian preferred to spend it reading fiction rather than a textbook. Her older sister and brother had finished school and gone to the city to study. The aunt waved her hand at her nephews with annoyance. What can you take from them? She had high hopes for the younger ones, Vivian and her brother Oscar. She hoped that they would stay in the village for the rest of their lives and help their old aunt. There was no one else she could hope for. Oscar immediately decided that he would be, like his father, a tractor driver, and Vivian every year more and more strengthened in the idea of becoming a milkmaid. Although this dream looked quite strange for a young girl, all her peers dreamed of more interesting and prestigious professions, if not a teacher or a doctor, then at least a hairdresser or dressmaker. To work from morning till evening in manure? Yuck, no, not at all, said Vivian's peers. The brother and sister were growing up. Oscar already had his admirers. Every now and then he'd run off to go out with some pretty girl. His aunt used to curse at him as much as she could. First he skips all night, and then during the day he cannot really study at school or work. He sits at home and pecking his nose after his female adventures. Vivian alone did not give her aunt any trouble, helped her with the household chores, studied diligently, did not go out with the boys. Teachers never complained about her. Unlike the same Oscar, who was famous for his ardent and turbulent character and often arranged at school fights and provoked conflicts. By 18 years old, girl blossomed, became pretty as a porcelain doll. Even surprising that in a simple family of ordinary village laborers could appear such a beauty, blue-eyed blonde, thin bones, slender figure, graceful elongated hands and fingers, as if a ballerina or a pianist. And with such delicate, fragile fingers you were going to be a milkmaid. Oscar laughed at her. But Vivian was not offended. She was confident in her abilities. The village boys began to look at the girl. Classmates, Oscar's friends whistled admiringly after her, tried to walk her home, to make a casual conversation. But Vivian didn't need any of that. She only looked at the next gentleman with a surprised look from under her long eyelashes and hurried home. She had no time for idle talk. She had so much to do. In her senior year of high school, she managed to get a part-time job on a cattle farm. Not full-time, of course. But her boss assured her he'd be happy to hire her permanently after graduation. "Why would you spend years getting a specialized education?" Charles told her. "It's just a piece of paper no one needs. The only thing you have to do is pass a medical exam and get a medical book. Anything you need, you can learn on the job in the process. I can see you have a heart for cows." Vivian listened to Charles with interest. "You know how to approach them, and they are attracted to you. Besides, your health and stamina are excellent." Years young, he glanced approvingly at the girl's handsome figure. "I think you will be able to milk perfectly well, and if you don't understand something, our women will teach you everything in no time." Of course, they didn't let her start milking right away. At first, she worked as an assistant to the more experienced Elizabeth and learned under her. Elizabeth was perky, mocking and sharp-tongued, divorced, at that famous Barry woman again age. Rumor had it she was having an affair with Charles himself. That's why he made her head milkmaid on the farm. Actually, the official title of milkmaid was machine milking operator. Vivian had no idea whether it was true or not, the rumors about Elizabeth's affair with the boss, but just in case, like everyone else, pretended not to know anything. Charles had been married for a long time and hardly wanted to publicize his extramarital affairs. And all would be well, but only Vivian began to catch strange, evaluating gazes of her superiors. Charles often began to linger on her and literally devour her with his eyes. Each time she became very uncomfortable. She wanted to shrink back and close herself off, to wipe away the oily residue of his gaze. Until the very last moment, Vivian had convinced herself that she had imagined it. After all, she was completely inexperienced in matters of relationships. But, unfortunately, Charles's attentions became more and more apparent every day. When he dropped in on the milkmaids, he was invariably complimentary. "Ah, Vivian, you're a beauty today. You are blooming and smelling." The girl tried to turn it into a joke. "What do I smell like?" "Dung," she laughed. But the boss was hanging around her, trying to touch her shoulder or thigh as if by accident. Vivian was nervous in his presence, twitching and fidgeting, wishing he would go away. And then Elizabeth began to cast suspicious, jealous glances at her. Vivian felt guilty for no reason and didn't know how to get rid of the intrusive suitor. Directly and rudely send him away she could not, after all, the bosses. Besides, she really needed this job. One day during a break between milking, Elizabeth pinned Vivian in a corner and asked her threateningly, "Why are you making eyes at the boss, you little bitch?" Vivian flared up, frightened, indignant. "I'm not making eyes at anyone," she said. "I need him very much." "Yes, of course you do," Elizabeth squinted incredulously. "You're not as simple as you'd like to make yourself out to be. You're thinking of getting into bed with your boss to make your career, but it's not going to work." "Elizabeth, I had no idea." Vivian was ready to cry. "Honestly, I don't want him." But Elizabeth apparently did not believe her and made her lover to find out about the relationship. It ended with Charles scandalously threw her out of the farm and in her place put Vivian. Of course, all the other milkmaids were shocked. To put some inexperienced girl over them, all experienced workers, to boss them around. Then everyone confirmed that Vivian sleeps with the boss and hated her. However, no one dared to offend the chief's mistress openly. But everyone did her some little mischief under the radar. And Charles increased the pressure and began more and more often and more unambiguously cut circles around the young girl. "You are disturbing me." She couldn't stand it any longer. "I need to clean up the machine and the buckets." "Those buckets won't get away from you," Charles whispered hotly, coming close to her, burning her skin with his hot breath. "Oh, you're so sweet. I just can't." Vivian was horrified to see his bulging and wet lips in front of her. Charles had folded them in a bow and apparently expected the girl to kiss him. She shuddered with disgust. Without realizing what she was doing, Vivian fumbled for the pail and slipped it over her boss's head with a clatter. Charles shrieked so loudly that the whole farm could hear. The milkmaids froze when they saw the boss with an empty bucket on his head. But the most sensational thing began next. Suddenly in the crowd appeared Charles's wife, who flew up to her spouse, furious fury. "Who did this?" she shouted, pointing her finger at the bucket and glaring menacingly at those present. Everyone knew that Charles was afraid of his strict wife. It was not surprising, for it was hard not to be timid in front of such a woman. In response to her question, everyone froze, and the chief, hearing his wife's voice, stopped yelling and quickly pulled off his bucket. Charles didn't look so good, of course. His face was flushed red, his sparse hair was sticking from the drops of milk, which was a little left in the bucket. "I repeat the question, who did it?" the wife said in a frightened voice. Everyone remained silent, but they glanced at Vivian. The angry woman also stared at her. The girl turned pale and involuntarily took a step back, as if she was afraid that she was going to grab her hair or scratch her eyes at her. "What is your name?" the woman asked. "Vivian," the poor girl whispered. "Vivian?" Charles's wife asked in amazement. "Isn't she the same Vivian that Elizabeth told me a lot of interesting things about this morning?" Vivian, aghast. "I don't know what she might have told you, but honestly, I haven't done anything wrong." She realized that, angry at her sudden dismissal, and offended Elizabeth had gone straight to her former boss's wife. Apparently, she had told her that her husband was having affairs with a young milkmaid. How was she supposed to justify herself? Everyone here was against her. "I really didn't do anything," Vivian mumbled quietly, lowering her eyes. And the woman suddenly grinned in a way that was not evil at all and said, "Yes, I can see that you haven't. If you'd really been tangling with my husband, you wouldn't have put a bucket on his head. I guess he was trying to make a move on you, wasn't he?" "I know that old dog," said Charles' wife. "Nicole, that's not true," Shiley raised his voice, the hapless suitor. "I had no intention of being interested in this girl. Just look at her. As they say, no face, no figure. I'll fire her immediately, so you don't have to worry." Vivian cried out sorrowfully. She's going to be fired after all. And for what? She didn't do anything wrong. She was just defending her honor. "The only thing I can see is that you got what you deserved," said the wife angrily. "The girl you got was really honest and decent. Don't you dare fire her. Do you understand? She seems to be the only person you can trust here on this farm." All right, Nicole Charles said. "If you say I don't have to fire her, I won't. Let her work. And don't even think about getting within 2 meters of her," said the wife sternly. "Got it? If I find out you're hitting on girls, I'll rip your ass off." Charles nodded hastily and fearfully. "But Elizabeth, who complained to me, I'll pull your hair out," his wife promised grimly. She was clearly jealous. "What did you have with her?" The wife still long reprimanded Charles, and he only listened to her silently, pulling his head into his shoulders. Yes, with such a wife and really not fun. However, the advantages of Honey's appearance on the farm were still there. First, Vivian would never be fired. And secondly, Charles had stopped his harassment and dirty hints. What hints? He was afraid to even look in Vivian's direction. Soon the girl completely got used to it, and every morning happily ran to work. She was not interested in anything else, even during graduation, when all her classmates went to the river to meet the dawn. Vivian quietly ran away. What dawns? She had her first milking at 0500 hours, and before that she had to remove the manure from under the cows, distribute hay to them, and water her favorites, cute, funny, and trusting calves. By that time, my aunt was getting sick more and more often. She had long since retired, and she had almost no strength left to do anything at home or in the vegetable garden. In her old age, she became sentimental. She cried all the time, which was not like her at all. She apologized to her niece for not giving her love and affection. Vivian's eyes rounded in surprise, and she waved it away. "Oh, Nancy, please, come on. What do you mean you didn't? If it hadn't been for you, we'd all be in an orphanage. And the fact that you don't like tenderness is not the only thing that shows care and love. You gave us a roof over our heads, a piece of bread. That's priceless. You and Oscar will have your own families," the aunt said, barely audibly wiping away the tears rolling down her wrinkled cheeks. "He'll get married. You'll get married. You'll have children, and then you won't need me at all. I'll be all alone." Vivian wrinkled her nose and assured her that she would never leave her aunt alone for anything in the world. What would she care about marriage and children? She doesn't think about it at all. She has no time. She has cows instead of children. One morning the girl, having finished the first milking, having fed and cleaned the cows, was going to drink tea and eat a sandwich in her legal break. At that moment, however, Charles came running into the barn. His eyes were burning and his bald head was red. His forehead was glistening with sweat from the exertion. "Come here, all of you," he shouted at the milkmaids. The women surrounded the chief with surprise, not understanding what had happened and why he was so excited. "We have guests, very important guests," Charles blurted out, raising his index finger meaningfully. "We've got to make a good show of it in front of them." "Who else?" "Some kind of inspection," one of the milkmaids asked with displeasure. "Take it higher, a sponsor. More precisely, a client," said the chief with a gasp. "What do you mean?" His subordinates didn't understand. "Have you ever heard the name Alex?" Charles asked. The women furrowed their foreheads, remembering. Vivian remained silent. She had little interest in the outside world and had no idea who Alex was. "Is he a milk billionaire or something?" someone finally guessed. "Exactly," the chief nodded importantly. "The owner of the largest dairy plant in the country. And he's interested in the milk our cows produce on the farm." "Wow," someone gasped. "Wow." It happens Charles was even a little offended. Why not? Do our cows give bad milk? No, it's good milk. But where are we and where is the capital's billionaire? The milkmaids are making a lot of noise. Anyway, it's none of my business and none of yours how he came to us and why he was interested. Charles waved his hand irritably. Our business now is to keep him from changing his mind. We have to get him to sign milk contracts with us. If it works out, we'll be happy then. He will improve the premises and provide us with modern milking machines. The milkmaids murmured approvingly. In general, get ready, he will arrive in half an hour with his entourage, personally inspect our farm, cows, take a sample of milk. And how to get ready. The women didn't understand at once. Charles splashed his hands briefly. How? Get yourself and the cattle in order. Or what? Wash the cows, brush them. They are already clean, the milkmaids took offense. Actually, we take care of our cows without reminders. In short, that everything was clean and beautiful. Now don't let us down. We have to make sure Alex likes it, Charles said, and then he was off, puffing. Oh, if I'd known that a billionaire from the capital was coming to see us, I'd have changed into a fancy dress, laughed one of the milkmaids. What's the point? Hummed another of her co-workers. You'd think these billionaires would look at us as women. And why not? Took offense at the first one. We are probably no worse than their women in the capital. They are all in the very juice, shapely, ruddy. Maybe we're not worse, grinned the third. Only billionaires want others. They have their own standards of beauty, tattooed eyebrows, lips like dumplings, silicone breasts, nails, false eyelashes, and hair. Michelle, the oldest worker on the farm, spat in her heart. Ugh, that's disgusting. That's right, said the younger women. Their wives and mistresses are all fake. But here, let him see the real American beauty. This is not the stuff of the capital. Everyone laughed merrily. Vivian was the only one who didn't join in the fun. The arrival of the milk billionaire left her indifferent. So what if he owned a dairy? What should she do now? Ingratiate herself with him? She didn't care about that at all. At last there were voices and noise outside. Apparently some high-ranking guests had arrived. The dairy maids lined up, ready to greet Alex in full parade. It turned out that the billionaire had indeed arrived not alone, but with a whole entourage. There were also security guards, deputies, a lawyer, and some other people with him. Vivian, who had previously assured herself that she was not the least bit interested in the capital's rich, involuntarily paid attention to one of Alex's companions. He was a young man, quite young, not older than 20 years. The girl was struck by his appearance. She had previously seen such things only in movies about fairy tale princes. The guy had very fine, aristocratic facial features, deep dark eyes, black eyebrows, expressive cheekbones, and beautifully shaped lips. Let me introduce you my only son and the future heir of my business. Alex nodded towards the young man, looking at him with tenderness. Brian, please love and welcome. Love is always welcome, one of the milkmaids joked. The others greeted this remark with laughter. What a pretty boy. Just a candy, whispered someone not far from Vivian. I could eat him up. But the heir himself was clearly not thrilled about the visit to the cowshed. On the contrary, it looked as if he could hardly contain his disgust. What a smell, he muttered under his breath, squeamishly. It seemed quiet, but Vivian heard him. It's manure, she told him quietly. The boy stirred and looked up at her. What? I said it smells like manure, Vivian explained, feeling her heart flutter. It's a strong odor that makes you dizzy when you're not used to it. Then you get used to it, and it's okay. Brian looked at her with interest. So you work here? She nodded. I work right here. The young man looked at her carefully. First he looked at her face, huge blue eyes with long eyelashes, full pink lips, dimples on her cheeks, and then at her slender, well-built figure. He seemed pleased with what he saw. Doesn't the smell bother you? He asked with interest. Vivian shook her head. I don't notice it anymore, and I don't have time for that. I have a lot of work to do. In the meantime, Alex looked closely and in detail at the barn, cows and calves, asking questions. How many times a day do you milk? He asked Michelle, who was the oldest and therefore looked more solid. It is known how many. Twice, she said, as it should be, at 0500 and at 1700. It's not enough. Alex shook his head. We should switch to 3 milkings a day to increase the numbers. Charles nodded obsequiously. If you say so, Alex, we should do it. We will. We'll schedule the second milking for 1100. Here Vivian could not keep silent and loudly indignant. But this is not right. All eyes immediately turned to her. Alex frowned. What do you mean you can't? Nice girl. Charles discreetly made scary eyes and poked Vivian in the side. Vivian is just joking, isn't she? But she wasn't so easily confused either. With a determined shake of her head, Vivian repeated stubbornly. You can't milk cows 3 times a day in winter, unless they're dairy cows and recently calved. Which ones? The young man asked her quickly. Vivian glanced in his direction, blushed, but still explained. Recently calved. They usually have the most milk, but for all the others, milking 3 times a day is not suitable. Why is that? Alex was interested. Vivian, a little embarrassed to be in the center of attention, still gathered her thoughts and explained. The cow is not a mechanism. She needs rest and rest. For a year or 2, of course, she will give more milk, but then she will just wear out. You can do it in summer, but not in winter. Why can you do it in the summer? Brian asked. Because you don't have to feed the cows. They get all the nutrients they need from the pasture. If they eat a lot of greens, the milk yields go up. Bite your tongue, Charles hissed. He turned pale with anger, clenching his teeth. But Alex, hearing his retort, waved his hand in protest. Why not? Let the girl speak. She offers quite reasonable things. I can see that she knows what she's talking about. Vivian only shrugged her shoulders, not knowing what else to say. The guests continued their tour first in the barn, and then in the farm as a whole. The dairymaids remained waiting for Charles' return and wondered whether the Moscow billionaire would sign a contract with them or not. Well, Vivian, you gave away. One of the milkmaids scolded her. Who asked you to get ahead and speak? If the deal falls through, Charles will take it out on all of us. The girl realized that it would have been better to bite her tongue, but she couldn't keep quiet. What was I supposed to do? She asked, almost through her tears. Silently watched the cows being mocked. For them, a cow is just an abstract source of milk. But for me, they are like family. They should be cherished. God be with them. With cows, someone waved his hand. Did you notice the way his son looked at you? Vivian blushed to the roots of her hair. You're not imagining things, Vivian objected. It was nothing like that. He just stood there and looked at you with his eyes slammed shut and looked so interested the girls insisted. It was nice to hear that, though I didn't believe it for a second. Why would that be? Brian? Interested in me? Don't he have enough hot girls of his own? There's plenty of them in New York. He's so handsome, someone said dreamily. Oh, he probably breaks girls' hearts left and right. Spoiled. That's all, said another milkmaid. He smells like manure. He didn't like it. Tell me, please, what a sissy. He's not a sissy, said Vivian, standing up for Brian. He's just not used to it yet. The milkmaids looked at each other meaningfully and laughed. Well, it's all clear. Vivian fell in love. The boy is handsome. Oh, come on. That's nonsense. The girl pulled the headscarf off her head and flew out of the cowshed. The capital's guests signed the contract after all. Charles set the table in the dining room and gave a generous meal to all the farm workers. It's like a rustic corporate party. True, the boss couldn't resist reprimanding Vivian. But why did you get involved? Why did you speak up? Couldn't you keep your mouth shut? Such a lucrative contract almost ruined because of you. You, Charles, Vivian shouted angrily at him from the corner of her eye. Are you willing to kill animals for a lucrative contract? Charles was embarrassed. Why do you start at once to kill? I love our cows as much as you do, by the way. Vivian squinted incredulously. Yes, of course. You still can't remember their names. To you, all cows look alike. But to me, they're all like people. Each one has its own personality, its own looks. Oh, you'll get a deal from me, Charles wagged his finger. I'll cut your salary. You have no right, bravely responded the girl. I give you the highest milk yields, and I take care of the cows like children. They are always clean, nourished, and caressed. That's why their milk is so delicious. All right, all right. The chief waved his hands at her with annoyance. I know that you can talk about your cows for hours. Just be thankful Alex likes you. Which one? One of the two, Vivian asked timidly, feeling hope flare in her chest. Which one? Alex, of course. She was deeply disappointed, but she tried not to show it. But watch it, Vivian, her boss warned her. They're going to be here a lot now, so please keep quiet. Don't speak. Vivian grasped the phrase with incredulous joy often. Or are they going to come all the way from New York every time? Why come? Alex has a place here. Have you seen that house by the lake? Vivian gasped. But of course she remembered and knew that house, not just a house, but a mansion, a real mansion. Vivian had only seen them in movies, about old landlords and serfs. But she'd never seen the massive, heavy gates open and anyone go in or out. There was no dog barking or human voices on the other side, so Vivian assumed no one lived in the house. Turns out it belonged to Alex's family. It's kind of like a summer house, Charles said condescendingly. They don't live there year-round. Of course, so they come on weekends. Yes, on holidays. But they'll come more often now. Anyway. I wonder, Vivian thought furtively, as if afraid that someone might overhear her thoughts. Will Brian come with his father? He's in the family business, too. What if I never see him again? Thinking about it was strangely painful. Why was she so caught up in it? After all, she had only seen this young man for a short time, but she'd already lost her head over him. The next encounter was quicker than she had hoped. Frankly speaking, Vivian now often walked near Alex's mansion when she had a break from the farm. In the winter, the village boys and girls would have a skating rink on the frozen lake. Vivian would grab her old skates and skate across the ice, glancing out the windows of the stately mansion. It was silly, of course, what could be seen from afar, but she hoped anyway. One day, disappointed that she had failed to see anyone again, she got ready to go home, and at that very moment a luxurious car pulled up to the gates of the mansion. The girl did not know about car brands, but it was clearly a very cool, expensive and tricked out one. Vivian froze, staring at the tinted windows of the car. The driver's side door swung open and Brian emerged from the car. The girl's heart nearly burst with excitement. At this time, as if sensing her gaze, Brian raised his head and saw Vivian. She first blushed, then turned pale and confused, frantically considered what to do. Say hello, pretend she didn't recognize her, run away? Brian was the first to break the silence, waving cheerfully at her. Hey, hello, Vivian. She even looked around in panic. Was this him addressing her or someone else? But there was no one else nearby, and then she nodded back in a nonchalant manner. Hi, Brian said, smiling, approaching her. Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of her chest. You can call me you, Brian said, coming up close to her. I'm not much older than you. How old are you? 19? The girl was so excited she couldn't even remember her own age. Well, I'm 21. So don't give me a hard time about it. He wagged his finger at her playfully. What's your name again? Vivian. Vivian, huh? Unusual. Very exotic, he grinned. I'm Brian. I remember, Vivian said, and then bit her tongue. Now he'd guessed that she'd been thinking about him for days. But the young man paid no attention to this. His gaze was now fixed on the skates which Vivian hung on her shoulder. Have you been skating? He asked with interest. The ice is firm. It holds, she nodded. Oscar can even drive a tractor across the lake in winter. Brian's eyebrows rose questioningly. Who's Oscar? Your boyfriend? No, Vivian shook her head. He's my brother. He looked at her face curiously and unashamedly. Do you have a boyfriend? Or maybe a husband? You country folk marry early. Vivian blushed almost to tears. I have no one, she said angrily. No boyfriend, no husband. Why is that? He seemed to be amused by her embarrassment and continued to question her with amused interest. She seemed so pretty. I would even say beautiful. He raised his hand and touched Vivian's cheek. His palm was hot, and Vivian recoiled as if she had been burned. I'm not like that, she shouted, and she ran away. Later at home, after she had escaped the anxious inquiries of Oscar's aunt, Vivian crawled away from the gaze of others to the stove, and there, in tears, scolded herself for her own foolishness. That she was indeed like a savage. I'm not, she mocked herself, and even groaned with annoyance. Brian must have thought her a complete fool. Uneducated, an idiot too, making a tragedy out of nothing. He must have laughed. Stupid redneck. She remembered over and over again that scalding touch on her skin and died of shame and regret that she hadn't let him continue. She wondered what he would do next. What if he had kissed her? The mere thought of his lips made her sweetly dizzy. There it was, she'd had her chance, and she'd blown it. It was unlikely Brian would look in her direction now, even if they ever met again. To her great surprise, however, the young man himself sought her out, came to the barn the next morning, and asked for Vivian. The milkmaid sent him in the right direction in a flash, giggling softly. When the girl saw Brian, she almost died on the spot. But the young man looked at her directly and openly, obviously not angry or mocking her for yesterday's behavior. Vivian, what do you do in the evenings? He asked her. She flared up. God, was he really going to ask her out on a date? Or maybe to a club for dancing or a movie? How scary. And how exciting. Realizing that the pause had gone on too long, Vivian blurted out. It's usually nothing special. I want to take you to dinner tonight, Brian said. Dinner? She asked in confusion. Was he asking her to go to a cafe? There were no proper restaurants in the village. There was only one modest cafe, which also served as a bar, more like a beer hall. Yes, Brian nodded. My place. Your place, Vivian repeated after him, feeling confused. Brian laughed. Look, I don't think you're thinking straight. To my house, the same house we met at yesterday. Remember? I remember. Vivian nodded awkwardly. He invites her to dinner at this luxurious mansion. Really? What's the occasion? She asked timidly at last. Do you have a holiday? A birthday? Maybe? No holiday. Just a nice, warm family dinner, Brian explained. Vivian didn't know what she had to do with a warm family gathering, but she didn't dare to ask the question head-on. So, do you agree? Brian rushed her. She nodded confusedly. I do. Good, he was pleased. I expect you by 8 o'clock this evening. Then, you'll be done here by then. He nodded at the cows. I will, Vivian replied. Then, I'll see you tonight. He smiled at her in a way that made her stomach feel warm and cozy, and waved goodbye and walked quickly out of the barn. Apparently the thick and strong smell of manure had gotten to him. Vivian was going out with the whole farm. The milkmaids at first did not believe that this major and handsome man had invited a girl to visit him, but Vivian had such a charming and happy look that it was clear that she was not lying. "You probably don't have any fancy clothes," sighed the milkmaids. "Nothing. I'll lend you my dress. I wore it to my sister's wedding in the city. I bought it specially for the occasion. It's very beautiful. And I'll give you my pearl beads. I'll give you my shoes. I'll do your makeup, Vivian. You don't know how to put on makeup, do you?" Oscar and his aunt were the only ones who took the news that Vivian had been invited to dinner without much enthusiasm. "It's strange," his brother said glumly. "Usually rich guys like us don't even consider people like us as people." "Strange indeed," agreed the aunt. "Oh, I don't like all this. I don't know if this rich man is up to something bad." Vivian was angry and offended to the point of tears. "What's all this about?" she shouted. "You shouldn't be happy for the man. You've ruined the mood." "Understand, this is the backwoods. We want to do good," Oscar started, approaching his sister, but she shoved his hand away. "And if you want to do good, then just stay out of the way. Let me be happy for a little while. What good have I seen in my life except a barn?" Oscar and his aunt looked at each other, but didn't say anything. Vivian arrived at Alex's mansion early, afraid of being late. It was 07:40 on the clock, and all these 20 minutes she walked not far from the gate, not wanting to seem intrusive. When the appointed hour finally arrived, she felt frozen to the bone. She pressed the button, and a stern voice sounded from the intercom. "Who is it?" She was confused. "I'm Vivian. Brian asked me to dinner." "Come in." The voice was impassive, and the gate slid open silently. Vivian stepped into the courtyard, clutching her shoe bag tighter than a schoolgirl. She was met at the door by an elderly woman in uniform dress, obviously a servant. She took Vivian's modest coat and hung it on the coat rack. The girl was shy. Probably the housekeeper was used to seeing guests in expensive mink coats, and here she was with her old coat, but there was nowhere to go. None of the dairy maids on the farm had decent outerwear for winter. Mostly everyone wears down jackets, cheap and practical. "Come into the dining room," the housekeeper nodded, noticing that Vivian was frozen in the middle of the hallway, looking around in confusion. "Oh, Mama, I wish I knew where the dining room was." Vivian had never seen such rich houses before, only in the movies, of course. Now she was struck by everything: the plaster moldings on the ceiling, the gold trim, the spiral staircase to the second floor, and the exquisite antique furniture. "Straight ahead into the right," said the housekeeper, realizing her predicament. "Thank you," the girl thanked her and moved in the direction indicated. The doors of the dining room were open. Bright electric light and muffled voices were heard. On her way out, Vivian glanced at the huge gilt-framed mirror that hung on the wall. She pulled her dress off her shoulder, adjusted her beads, and stepped into the dining room with the air of a thea. There was silence as she entered. The soft conversation immediately died down. The people at the table stared at her. Vivian nodded hesitantly, recognizing Alex. "Hello?" Next to the owner of the house sat a beautiful, well-groomed woman, and not even just a woman, but an elegant lady of about 40 to 45 years old. Apparently, this was the wife of the dairy magnate. She was also Brian's mother. Looking around the room, Vivian was finally relieved to find Brian himself. He was sitting a little farther away, on the opposite side of the table. "Hello," she nodded to him. "Oh, Vivian, you're here." The young man rejoiced, rising to meet her and taking a few steps in her direction. Once there, he took her hand and led her solemnly to the table. "Mom, Dad, meet Vivian. The one I told you about." "The one I told you about," the mother said. Not looking away from the girl, Alex frowned, remembering. "A milkmaid on the farm, if I'm not mistaken." "You're not mistaken," Vivian answered quietly, feeling more and more awkward. There was something going on between the three of them, father, mother, and son, that Vivian could not understand. It was as if they had all learned their roles, but she had forgotten to read the text. That was why she was standing there now, her eyes fluttering and her gaze shifting from one to the other. Her mother clutched her heart like an opera singer. "Oh, what are you so shocked about, Mom?" Brian asked calmly. "We honor every kind of work. Haven't you told me that many times yourself?" "Vivian, sit down," he said with exaggerated gallantry as he led her to the table and pulled out a chair for her. The dinner, which was supposed to be one of the most memorable and colorful events in Vivian's simple life, had turned into a torment for her. She didn't know how to approach all the many cutlery items, so she ate very little. She would watch which knife or fork Brian took and repeat after him. "Why do you eat so little?" Vivian asked the young man, and she answered quietly that she had no appetite. Vivian asked Brian's mother at last, drilling her with a glance, "How long have you known my son?" "It's been a week now," she said artlessly. "A week?" The woman raised her eyes to the ceiling. "Jesus, that's crazy. All right, I know my son. He can do a lot of things out of stubbornness. But you, how could you agree to this adventure?" She turned to Vivian, and she just clapped her eyelashes together in incomprehension. "What adventure?" "Well, yes," continued her mother, unheeding. "I understand. Brian is a rich, handsome boy. And I suppose you want to get out of your old life and into a new one. But to consent to marriage after a week's acquaintance." Vivian had just taken a sip of juice from a tall glass and choked. Vivian tried to catch her breath out of surprise. "What marriage consent? What marriage?" She spoke with difficulty, clearing her throat. "I don't understand." And when Brian slapped his forehead theatrically, "Vivian, darling, I forgot to ask you the most important thing of all. Will you marry me?" Brian was a late, only and therefore beloved and terribly spoiled child. His parents had never denied him anything, shook over him, guessed every wish and fulfilled the slightest whim. Since childhood, he received everything he wanted, and the boy wanted a lot. Every year more and more. First expensive toys, then tricked-out gadgets, then a motorcycle, a car, an apartment. His parents chewed him out with a soft smile for being wasteful, but in the end they still went along with it. Obviously, whatever the child is not a child, as long as it does not cry. Meanwhile, Brian did not want to study or work. His father managed with great difficulty to cram him into the university, but his son studied poorly. Or rather, he didn't study at all. Barely crawled from course to course. Thanks to Alex's connections, the teachers, gritting their teeth, drew C's in his report card, and his father made a scandal after every session, demanding from Brian to get his head on straight. "You're my only heir," his father raged. "Who am I going to leave my business to if you don't know anything about it?" "Maybe I don't want to be a businessman," Brian waved it off lazily. "And anyway, I haven't had my fun yet. I want to live for myself, and you're making me feel obligated." "Oh, to live for yourself," Dad was furious. "You mean spending time in clubs and bars with your friends and gores?" Brian grinned, showing off his blindingly white teeth. "But at least it's more fun than working your pants off in an office, ruining your eyesight and poring over business papers." "It's nothing," his wife tried to console Alex. "He'll get over it. He'll be happy and settle down." But time passed, and Brian was not going to settle down. His patience broke at the moment when Alex found out that Brian had an affair with a stripper. He met this girl of questionable behavior in a strip club, started showering her with gifts and attention, and she predictably gave in, and all would have been fine. But Brian fell in love and said he wanted to marry Kayla. That was the stripper's name. And that's when the house first erupted in an uproar. "Over my dead body," Alex shouted in a terrible voice. "I'm not giving you a dime for this wedding, and I'm not giving you another dime. If you want to get married, but then you have to support your young wife and earn your own money from a wife and a place to live, because your Kayla will never live in our house." He could, of course, slam the door nicely and really leave his parents' house. But Brian wasn't an idiot. When emotions cooled a little, the young man realized that without his father's help he really could not live. He had never once in his life earned even a loaf of bread. All his needs and whims were paid for by his father. Even cell phone service and internet. Brian had absolutely no money-making or saving skills. He was poor as a church mouse. Even if he sold the car, he wouldn't have enough to pay for his wedding or rent his own place, living on his wife's money. But Kayla had promised him she'd leave the stripping to him after the wedding. Anyway, there was no rash action in this case. You had to think things through and try to find a compromise. But what kind of compromise could there be if his father didn't even want to hear about Kyle? Brian had tried several times to turn his father in his girlfriend's favor. He started acting interested in his father's business. He even went with him to the farm and visited the cow barn so his father would appreciate his efforts. But all to no avail. "No, absolutely, once and for all. I will never allow this marriage. Don't disgrace me," he shouted at Brian. "Remember, any, but not Kayla." Brian lifted his chin stubbornly and glared defiantly at his father. "Anybody?" Then he gritted his teeth. "Either one," Alex waved his head firmly. Well, Brian had a brilliant idea, as it seemed to him. Anyone, so anyone will choose. Vivian from the cowshed had happened by chance. Brian noticed at once the eyes this country shepherdess was looking at him with. She addressed him as if he were a deity. Getting her involved in his plan was a piece of cake. I must tell my parents that I'm going to marry Vivian. It dawned on him. Brian was pretty sure that option would please them even less than it would Kyle. His father would probably freak out and quickly agree to marry Kayla. He didn't care about Vivian or her feelings at all. She was just a bargaining chip. So what if some milkmaid was staring at him, mouth open, eyes flapping, looking at him with adoration? It's a laugh, that's all. Inviting the girl to dinner, Brian had already warned his parents that he was going to get married. Of course, he didn't tell Vivian about his plans. He was sure she would agree. The scene in the dining room amused him. The looks on both his parents' faces. His father's face had nearly given him a stroke. So Brian continued, "Will you give me your consent, Dad?" Vivian froze next to him, speechless. She and Alex were dumbfounded, shifting their gazes from one to the other. She hadn't said yes to him yet, but Brian had no doubt that in her heart she would follow him to the ends of the earth. His father puffed noisily, poured himself a glass of mineral water and drained it, setting it on the table with a clatter. He stared hard at Vivian. Well, Brian thought to himself, nice bride. He'd asked for it. He was sure that against the plain, indescribable Vivian, his Kayla looked like a real queen, stylish, well-groomed, with a perfect body honed by hours of fitness and stripping. So Dad's gonna have to go along with it. He's the one who got Brian on the spot. Anybody but Kayla now. Let him be happy to get anyone. Let him compare and regret his decision. But suddenly things didn't go according to plan. Once more pouring himself some water and drinking, her father scrutinized Vivian again, first from head to toe and then back from top to toe. Well, Alex said hoarsely, "Then so be it." Brian was wary. "What do you mean?" Dad grinned. "I'll marry her. I can see she's a nice girl, so I don't mind." Brian thought he'd misheard. "Are you joking now?" he asked hopefully. Even his mother, who had been standing silent until then, gasped and covered her mouth with her palm. "Alex, what are you talking about?" she exclaimed. "What's wrong?" "My father had miscalculated. I'm a man of my word. If I promised, I keep my promise." Vivian seemed to be the only one in the company who didn't understand what they were talking about. What promise? In fact, no one paid any attention to her at all, as if she wasn't even here. Father and son stared defiantly at each other, and the mother tossed between them, trying to find a compromise. Dad Brian raised his voice. "I'm not in the mood for silly shenanigans right now." Alex shook his head seriously. "I'm not joking around, and I'm not playing a prank on you, son. I do give my paternal consent to this marriage, and will even help organize the wedding." Of course, Vivian said yes. She had never dreamed of such happiness literally falling on her head. The most beautiful man in the world, Brian Olenikov, offered her hand and heart. She did not even think about the fact that such a hasty proposal looks a little strange. Could it be that Brian had fallen in love with her so quickly that he wanted to take her as his wife? On the other hand, she urged herself, why not? Don't these things happen in life? It happens. She herself had fallen in love with Brian practically at first sight. Vivian had no idea how father and son had yelled at each other after she'd left. "Did you set that up on purpose?" Brian resented her. "Yes, to make a fool of me." "I think it was your intention to make a fool of me," his father retorted. "But you didn't. Nobody pulled your tongue. You said you were going to marry that girl." "You're just being a jackass," Brian continued to shout, punishing me on principle. "Did it occur to you that I might actually marry that hillbilly?" "I did," my father nodded. "If you're going to do it to the end. If you yourself announced that you were going to marry a milkmaid, if you proposed to her in public, then marry her. You have to be responsible for your words. And you want your only son to marry you." There was a squeamish grimace on Brian's face. "Why not? At least I'm much more sure of that girl's purity and decency than I am of your Kayla's morals and principles," his father said. "I'm going to get married," Brian yelled almost hysterically. "Get married, son," Alex nodded. "Mary, we'll give you a big wedding right here in the village." That's how Vivian became the milkmaid's bride. At first, of course, they didn't believe her. "Oh, stop making things up, friend," they told her the next morning in the barn. "Well, a guy invited you to dinner once, well, with his parents. But even if he kissed you in a secluded corner, and you've already made up that he wants to marry you." Vivian took offense. "I wasn't imagining anything. He proposed to me in front of my father and mother." "It doesn't work that way," the women looked at each other, shaking their heads. "Billionaires don't marry milkmaids. This is not a soap opera." However, what was their surprise when at the end of the working day in the cowshed appeared a refined lady, Alex's wife, Brian's mother. She strode grimly through the barn, occasionally bringing a perfumed handkerchief to her face, or even squeamishly covering her nose. The women fell silent, staring at the stranger. Her coat alone was worth more than the entire closet of each of them. Vivian was the only one who recognized the intruder at once. "Oh, hello," Vivian said, daring to say hello. Matilda gave her a cold look and asked, "Is your workday over?" Vivian nodded hesitantly. "Then we'll go into town to pick out your wedding dress at the salon." "Oh," Vivian gasped. "Why a salon?" "I wanted to order it from Grandma Grace, the dressmaker. She's a great wedding dressmaker." "And it will be cheaper than in a salon, child," sarcastically said the future mother-in-law. "Forget I wanted cheaper. Brian's wife should have the best, the most expensive." The milkmaids listened to the conversation with avid curiosity and only had time to wonder, was it really true? Brian had proposed to Vivian. Such a thing does not happen in life. But the wedding did take place. Brian had hoped it would be a quiet affair, but it didn't. As if in retaliation for all his bachelorhood, his father decided to organize a big and loud wedding to attract as much attention as possible. It was as if he wanted to embarrass his own son on purpose. The news headlines screamed, "A modern-day Cinderella tale, billionaire's son marries milkmaid," and Brian gritted his teeth with impotent rage. Yes, and friends, having learned the news, literally pelted him with questions and ridicule. However, when the media leaked photos of the young bride, malcontents somehow hushed in silence. The bride was miraculously good in a snow-white dress, which favorably emphasized all the curves of her dainty and slender figure, but did not look provocative or vulgar. The best makeup artist was working on her makeup, and the best stylist had done an elaborate hairstyle on her head. Vivian looked at herself in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. Was this really her, a simple country girl? Was she marrying the most real, beautiful prince, better and more beautiful than him in the world? The prince, by the way, was also impressed by the change. He had probably already resigned himself to the idea that he did not want to marry a village girl, and now he was faced with a delicate, awe-inspiring fairy. Vivian was just as good as Kayla in appearance, Brian grudgingly admitted to himself. Still, he was not happy about the marriage, realizing how cleverly his father had tricked him. However, the young man did not intend to remain the spouse of this naive girl for a long time. You just need to put his father's vigilance, get access to finances, save more money, and then quietly divorce and build happiness with another, with the one with whom he himself wants. However, his father was more cunning than Brian thought. After the marriage ceremony in the registry office, when the whole crowd was going to an expensive restaurant rented for the wedding, Alex strictly told his son, "Don't think you can go back to your stripper. I've got it all worked out. I've got it all documented with a lawyer. If you file for divorce from Vivian, you'll lose my financial support completely." Brian squinted his eyes angrily. "Did you put me in this trap on purpose?" he whispered. "Dad, do you really want me to spend the rest of my life with an uneducated, stupid milkmaid?" "She's not that stupid," Dad said. "And what are you boasting about your education? In fact, all credits and exams I bought you, so don't think that you are smarter than your wife. And in some worldly and domestic matters, she'll give you 100 points ahead of her." Brian turned away from his father and looked at his new wife. She was happy, smiling, looking at him with a shy tenderness. How naive should one be to believe that he was really serious about her? On their wedding night, Vivian had shocked Brian by the fact that he was her first man. Frankly, he'd thought girls like that didn't exist anymore, gone like the dinosaurs. So they could keep their innocence until they were 19. But then, Brian thought, she'd never seen anything but cows in her life. No wonder she'd never dated a guy. Whatever he said, it flattered him. After the wedding, Vivian continued to reverently catch his every word, looking into his eyes, trying to anticipate every wish. Sometimes it annoyed him, just pissed him off. Well, what kind of naive girl got him as a wife? What kind of a wife is that? She can't say a word against her. Vivian's older brother and sister from town came to the wedding. They could not believe that their sister got one of the most eligible bachelors in New York, but the other brother, Oscar, an aunt, who lived in the village. They did not accept the young man. They looked at Brian warily and unfriendly, as if every second they were waiting for some trick from him. Brian was angry and resentful. Who do these commoners think they are? They should be praying to him for marrying this country girl. However, at the wedding, Oscar approached the groom and, leaning toward him from the height of his Bogatyrsky height, quietly said, "If you try to offend Vivian, I'll kill you." Brian looked at his powerful shoulders, which were clearly too tight in the new jacket, and muttered reluctantly, "I won't. Don't worry." He didn't want to get mixed up with the big man. Vivian had to give up her job at the farm. Alex said that it was not suitable for his daughter-in-law to carry manure and milk cows. Not in status, not in position. "You are not a stupid girl. You need to study," said her father-in-law. "Maybe in the future you will help me in business. At least you know much more than I do about cattle, milk yields, and other things." Vivian did not dare to argue with her father-in-law, but still, Deep down, she longed for her cows and her milkmaid friends, but she at least tried to be useful in the house, helped the servants with cleaning, the cook with cooking. Everywhere tried to be on time. Everywhere was indispensable. My mother-in-law at first grudgingly wrinkled her nose and grumbled at her country ways, but then, noticing how everything changed in the house, with the appearance of Vivian for the better, stopped wrinkling her face. This girl created an atmosphere of warmth, harmony, and comfort around her. In her society, everyone was easy, pleasant, and calm. And of course, Vivian was working on books, preparing to enter the university. Alex gave her a computer, taught her to use the internet with confidence, and soon the girl took many study materials from the network. But with Brian, unfortunately, the relationship with Vivian was not very happy. She tried to be a good wife, she tried very hard, but Brian looked at her as an empty place, not noticing. He went to her only at night, and during the day young beautiful wife for him as if did not exist. 2 months after the wedding, Vivian, helping the cook prepare breakfast in the kitchen, suddenly looked at the sizzling pan and felt that she felt sick. The smell and sight of bacon and eggs suddenly seemed so disgusting that she clasped her mouth with the palm of her hand and rushed out of the kitchen toward the bathroom. Her mother-in-law watched the girl hugging the toilet thoughtfully and then philosophically said, "I think we should make an appointment for you to see a gynecologist. It seems to me, my dear, that you are pregnant." Pregnant? Vivian almost choked with happiness. Could it really be true? A child was the most precious thing she could give her husband. Brian would surely be overjoyed when he heard the news. Maybe he'll be a little softer, a little more affectionate. They say children make a marriage stronger. The mother-in-law took her daughter-in-law to a doctor she knew. She confirmed the pregnancy and rejoiced with the news. It turns out that Vivian will have twins. Unfortunately, Brian was not too happy to hear that he was going to be a father. He seemed to be even more distant from his young wife, became withdrawn and taciturn. Vivian was at a loss to understand what had happened, what she had done wrong. Did he not want children, or did he dislike her after she became pregnant? But the fact remained that her pregnancy was of far more concern to her mother-in-law than her own husband. Brian almost stopped paying attention to her, never spoke to her, or even looked in her direction. In the 9th month of her pregnancy, Vivian overheard a fragment of their conversation with her father as she passed by her father-in-law's office. The door was ajar, and the voices could be heard clearly. "Are you happy now?" "Yes," Brian asked bitterly. "I'm bound now. Is that what you wanted?" "All I wanted was for my son to finally grow up and become an independent person who can take real responsibility for himself and for others," Alex answered sharply. "What are you fussing like a child for? Here's a family for you. A young wife. Soon there will be children too. Take care of them instead of whining." "You know very well I didn't want this marriage," Brian shouted. Vivian shuddered and turned pale when she heard this, and then pressed her back against the wall so that the 2 men wouldn't see her. "You literally forced me to marry that country girl. You wanted to punish me. Well, congratulations, punished. But I don't want to live with her anyway. I don't want to, and I won't. You understand?" Vivian swallowed her tears and hurried away. So that's how it is. It was all a lie. Brian had never loved her, and his parents knew it. Brian didn't want her or the little ones. Vivian wept bitterly, burying her face in her pillow to muffle the sounds. All her hopes, all her dreams had turned to dust. And why had she believed fairy tales were possible? It was clear from the start that miracles don't happen. Billionaires don't fall in love with country girls. That's true. But why? Why did she find out too late? And the next morning it turned out Brian was missing, just vanished without a trace. The night before, Vivian had gone to bed early, citing a headache and refusing to eat dinner. She couldn't see anyone right now, didn't want to talk to anyone. And so she had no memory of what time Brian had come in, or whether he'd even come to the bedroom to spend the night. But in the morning, when she woke up, he had taken some of his things and documents, gotten into his car, and driven off in an often unknown direction. His cell phone was unavailable. Maybe he'd changed his SIM card. Alex was furious. Dad's a jerk. Ungrateful. How dare he abandon his pregnant wife, take all the cash from the safe and run away. Bastard, he screamed. Matilda tried to calm him down, convinced him that perhaps the boy had just gone for a vacation and would return, but Alex continued to swear at her. He was no longer a boy, but a big man. How many times can you act like a kindergartner? And it was as if everyone had forgotten about Vivian, and she was probably the worst of all. Her beloved husband left her, ran away from her. He'd run away because Brian couldn't bear to live with her. It was humiliating and hard to realize. However, when the first shock passed, the mother-in-law came to her senses and paid attention to the girl. Matilda made her go to bed and calm down. She was not allowed to worry. Alex assured her that she had nothing to worry about. No one would give her a hard time. They would take care of her without Brian, but despite the fact that their tone was sincere and their words affectionate, Vivian felt alien, unnecessary, superfluous in this huge, rich house. A couple of weeks later, the labor began. Her father-in-law took her to the hospital where she was to give birth under contract. Everything was paid in advance. Highly qualified doctors, almost painless labor, a separate comfortable room, but the only person who was really needed now, her husband, was not there. However, when she was shown her babies for the first time, Vivian felt like crying with happiness. 2 tiny babies, so funny, so cute, so beautiful. The sons looked just like Brian. The in-laws were very happy about their grandchildren, hugged and kissed Vivian, congratulated and thanked her. But she realized that deep down it was all a sham. Brian had married her out of spite for her parents, and they had just pretended to accept her. She was a stranger to them, her and her children. When she was due to be discharged from the hospital, Vivian, without a word to anyone, packed ahead of time, took her babies, and called a cab through an app on her phone. She had the money in her account. "Doesn't anyone meet you?" The nurses and nannies marveled. No, Vivian shook her head, holding both her sons to her chest. "I'll get home on my own." Naturally, she didn't go to the Olenikovs. Vivian gave the cab driver her old address in the village. Oscar and his aunt were surprised to see Vivian back, but they were more pleased. They helped to arrange the babies on the big bed, sat the young mother at the table, and poured tea from the samovar. "Did you leave your husband for good, Vivian?" the aunt asked cautiously. "For good," she nodded. "Well, I didn't leave him. He left me first." "I'll kill the bastard." Oscar jumped up immediately. "I warned him." "If only there were someone to kill." Vivian grinned wryly. "He's been missing for a month, and I haven't seen him." She briefly told them all she knew. The aunt shook her head disapprovingly. "Oh, he's a bad boy. He hasn't grown up at all. He's trying to be a husband, so he made a mess of things." "Listen," Oscar suddenly asked worriedly, "and your parents-in-law will not want to take away the children. After all, they are their grandchildren." Vivian imagined this horror for a moment, but immediately responded, "They have no right. I am their mother, according to the law." "What's the law?" Oscar waved his hand, as if you don't know these rich people. "They bribe whoever they want, and the law doesn't apply to them." Vivian became afraid. What if the Olenikovs really wanted to take away her grandchildren? As if in answer to her thoughts, there was a loud knock at the door. Oscar winked at his sister, made a sign to keep silent, went out into the hall and shouted loudly and angrily. "Who was there?" Our own came a voice from the street that Vivian almost fainted when she recognized it. It was Brian. "I'm sorry," said the young man to his wife, kneeling in front of her and holding her hands in his. "I have been such a fool. I was blind and deaf. I didn't want to see the obvious." "Like what, exactly?" Vivian said carefully. "Like the fact that you really love me. Me, not my money." Vivian shrugged her shoulders in surprise. "I've never really cared about your money. I would have loved you beggar, barefoot and homeless." "There you go," Brian sighed. "And the girl I thought loved me kicked me out when I came to her with my things. She said I was a fool for cutting off my relationship with my father. Without his financial support, she wasn't interested in me anymore. I couldn't give her expensive gifts anymore, and when I ran out of money, she just told me to fuck off." "With how much do you love her?" Biting her lip to keep from crying, Vivian asked. Honestly, Brian thought for a moment. "I don't think I've loved her for a long time. I was drawn to her because it was forbidden fruit. It's known to be the sweetest. But at the core, she's a complete stranger to me. We're not made for each other. Especially since I have you. You, Vivian, Nika, and our babies." Brian glanced at the bed where his sons slept. "Look at you," Oscar said glumly. "Vivian, don't you want a toy? I can drop it if I want to, pick it up if I want to. Why the hell do you need such a fickle husband? You'd better get out of here, buddy, before I count all your bones." Vivian gasped. "Oscar, what are you?" "Oscar." The brother was angry. Why does this guy think he can get away with anything so easily? "He's right," Brian nodded. "What I did to you was despicable, and I deserve to be punished. But just know that I'm willing to wait as long as it takes and hope that one day you'll forgive me." Vivian shook her head. "You won't?" Brian asked sadly. She shook her head again. "I already have, silly," and in a moment he had his wife in his arms. Of course, Oscar and his aunt were still a little grumpy about the fickle man, and it was obvious that they wouldn't learn to trust him again right away, as unconditionally and wholeheartedly as Vivian had trusted him. But time heals in Brian's mind and soul. Something had really changed since he'd broken up with that stripper Kayla. Maybe he finally realized who in his life was truly important and needed, and who were casual acquaintances. Vivian wasn't casual. She was his family, his home, his warmth, his comfort, and the mother of his wonderful babies, whom he had held in his arms with awe and love for the first time in his life, pressed against his chest, and felt tears of happiness come to his eyes. It was evening, and the loud sounds of Indian melodrama could be heard in the house. The cheerful music sounded like a mockery. The wife of Camila's son, the lady of the house, had been doing chores late into the night. Now she was tearfully scrubbing the floors of the spacious four-room flat, and the music that played when they became husband and wife played in her head, and the words of the registrar came to mind. "Do you, Jennifer Johnson, agree to become the spouse of Nicholas Jones?" Why did she say yes? Gave in to her fiancé's entreaties to live with her mother. She put on a wedding ring, and that took her into a dark world of despair. Nicholas, indulging his mother in everything, didn't believe his wife. The miracle had not happened. Husband was not going to support and protect her in a difficult moment, and mother-in-law was dodgy, weaved intrigues, loaded unnecessary work, slandered on the daughter-in-law. Not the difficulties of family life frightened Jennifer. Offended Nicholas misunderstanding, the injustice of life. And today she scrubbed the floors for the second time, only because the mother of her husband did not believe her that she had already cleaned the whole house in the early morning. In the evening, Nicholas supported his mother, not understanding why his wife is stubborn and cannot do simple housework. Finished with the cleaning, Jennifer quietly snuck into the bathroom and closed. Here she could let her feelings out, rest from the family burden. The well-appointed flat, unlike her rural home, was a joy to bathe in at any time, without heating the cooker. It was a small consolation to Jennifer. She missed the peacefulness of the countryside, her yard, the warmth of communicating with the villagers. Picking up the water, with a snow-white cap of foam, she sank into the tub with pleasure. Once again she remembered the carefree minutes of her unmarried life, and then the acquaintance with Nicholas and such a sudden wedding. Jennifer had fallen in love with the kind guy on a motorbike at first sight. Nicholas then came to visit his grandmother in the village. One day, driving through the village, he saw a marvelous girl with a black braid down to her waist, a gentle look, and a basket in her hands. It was a marvelous vision, as if a forest nymph had come out of the pages of books. She was walking with a basket of cloudberries, which she had been given by a kind-hearted grandmother for a letter from her son. Nicholas stopped, asked to treat him to a strange berry, which he had never seen before, so the relationship began. The guy surrounded his beloved with care and invited her to live in his luxurious four-room flat. Jennifer immediately disliked Camila, the city's spoiled woman, who did not like her son. Not one of her son's girls, she had worn out her cunning, and here was a gift from Nicholas, a simple girl from the village, an orphan from Kazan with no family and no tribe. Jennifer buried her parents long ago and lived poorly, alone. She worked as a postmistress, but at the insistence of her husband, she resigned and moved to the city. Why? What for? There was a persistent knock at the door. Camila's irritated voice brought her out of her blissful memories. "Jennifer, you're at it again. How many times have I told you not to shut the door, and how many times can you pour water? You haven't brought a penny into the house yourself. She's a madam, but she takes a bath every day. Open the door immediately, I have to go to the bathroom. I have a scheduled beauty treatment." "Mum, what's wrong?" asked Nicholas, who came running at the screams. "Your wife did not wash my room, I had to do it myself, and I have a backache, I feel sick. The medicine is in the bathroom, I've been trying to persuade her for an hour and she refuses. And she was rude to me. Talk to your wife." "Why are you sassing me again, Mum?" "It's been 15 minutes and I've scrubbed the floors in every room." "No, look at you, you arrogant liar. Get out of my sight." Camila shoved her sister-in-law viciously in the side, causing her to almost fall over. Jennifer, Nicholas said coldly, "Stop arguing with your mom and show her some respect, please. If it's not too much trouble, Your Highness." He turned and walked away, stomping angrily. Day after day, her husband's mother nagged, making up tall tales, complaining to Nicholas about her deteriorating health, with such an ungrateful daughter-in-law. Jennifer baked pies, cooked French and Italian dishes, studied new recipes, watched videos on running a household. Nothing helped. The mother-in-law's main goal was to drive her daughter-in-law out by any means necessary. Kick her out for no reason, not her status. Nicholas is a prominent lawyer, and her late husband was a prosecutor. There were old connections, important people, not the last people in town. Camila was embarrassed by Jennifer, who didn't know how to handle cutlery, dressed gray, plain, and refused to go to salons. Unwillingness to do her hair and manicure pissed her off. When guests, the mother of the husband politely, but coldly owed her Girowetzia daughter-in-law, telling her not to show anyone in front of her. A year of hard, tedious, joyless life passed. Jennifer took a job in a shop near the house as a clerk. Her husband stopped giving her money at her mother's request. At work, the daughter-in-law rested from the endless reproaches, but at home it became even worse. Now Camila reproached her daughter-in-law for her unwillingness to do household chores. "My dear, you are always at work, and my husband must be fed and looked after. I'll talk to my son so he won't let you get out of hand." "Mom, I do everything. I cook in advance, all my things are in order, I clean up morning and night. What's the fashion in which you insisting on quitting your job? I'm ashamed you're working as a saleswoman with a husband like that. I'm ashamed of you. Because of you, Nicholas doesn't even leave me any money for the household, and I still have a house to keep in the village to pay the bills. Oh, Kazan orphan, you don't need to spend our money, you know that. Nicholas buys everything for the house." The arguments upset Jennifer. Later, the mother of the spouse reprimanded her son, as boorishly communicates his wife does not hear her advice. Jennifer was deeply hurt by Camilla's words that she was ashamed of her uneducated daughter-in-law. It was painful to remember why she never went to college. Jennifer was the pride of her parents. She graduated from high school with honors and planned to enter the medical academy. But a month after graduation, her parents were in a car accident on their way back from the city. Father died in the hospital, never regained consciousness. Mom fell into a coma. For 6 months, Jennifer traveled to all the hospitals, begging, hoping to save her mother, gave on the paw, begged to appoint an operation. The situation was hopeless. No one could help. Mom never woke up again. Having buried her mother, Jennifer was left an orphan. To live somehow, she worked part-time in a shop, then found a job at the post office. The road to the academy was closed. There was nothing to pay for her studies. Jennifer spent all the money she had saved on hospital and funeral expenses. The hard fate did not bother her mother-in-law. She could not allow a homeless girl from the village to run her house. Camila found a new way to get rid of her daughter-in-law. "Nicholas," she told her son, "we need an heir. Why can't your wife get pregnant?" "Mom, it's been so little time. Perhaps it's too soon to talk of children." "My dear, a child will help reconcile us all. It's such a blessing. I'll be so happy if you give me a grandchild." The cunning mother-in-law cried and hugged her son. "Okay, I'll talk to Jennifer. However, I agree. It's up to me." In the evening, Nicholas pleased his wife with his desire to have children. He didn't say anything about his mother's request. Camila went to extreme measures, which became known later. Jennifer rejoiced at the possibility of becoming a mom. A child could really soften her husband, and her life would be much happier. She had lived with the dream of having a child since her wedding, but it had not been possible to have children. Another 6 months passed. Jennifer cried as she held the test strip in her hands, disappointed again. Fear settled in her soul. Her mother-in-law would scream, her husband would support her mother and slam the door angrily. For the second month, he was less often at home. He stayed late at work, met with his mates. Camila was pleased. She had finally broken up the young people. There was one last step to take. One day, Jennifer entered the room and saw Nicholas, who sat with a twisted face of anger. When he saw his wife, he swung round and hit her in the face. "Ungrateful bitch," he shouted and threw a packet of pills at her. "How dare you lie to me and Mom? Explain to me, what are these?" "They're pills, but I've never seen them before." Crying with shaking hands, Jennifer read the instructions. They were birth control pills. The weight of the past months of endless humiliation, of frustration, came over her in an instant. She collapsed without feeling, no longer wanting to live and breathe in this cruel world of absurdity. Nicholas, though angry at his wife, felt guilty, could not bring her to her senses himself, called an ambulance. Camila snidely looked at the pills and indifferently escorted her daughter-in-law to the hospital. "Mom, why did she do this to me?" bitterly complained Nicholas, complaining to his mother. I told you. The hunchback will be corrected by the grave. Do not dare to forgive such a thing, divorce." "You can't do that, Mama. I promised her she'd be happy, but she lied to me too. I'm going to get up early in the morning to visit my wife and have a quiet talk." 3 days later, Jennifer was discharged. She took the bus home. Nicholas did not meet her. He was at work. Waiting for her at home was a suitcase and a note from her husband informing her that they were getting a divorce. Her mother-in-law was triumphant. She kicked Jennifer out without letting her wait for her husband. She was a country bumpkin, and she was still a country bumpkin. You shouldn't have messed us all about. Get out. I can't see you, you snake. You wanted to separate me from my son. It won't happen. Get out. I said get out. I want you out of here right now. The mother-in-law shouted after her, unwilling to stop her anger and triumph at the same time. In the evening, Nicholas learnt that his wife had left. Mum, why didn't Jennifer wait for me? How dare she leave me? Why didn't she say anything? Calm down, son. It was her decision. Camila was careful not to mention the note she had written, copying her son's handwriting. But how? She didn't even leave a note. You two haven't been getting along for a long time. That woman is not good for you. Who's that redneck going to give birth to you? And without children, there's no family, it's an omen. If she did, who would she give birth to? There's no reason to breed without a native simplicity. Look for a wife of status. Having got rid of her daughter-in-law, Camila felt over the moon. She had achieved her goal. It was her plan. For a year, she drank Jennifer a decoction of wormwood, convincing her that this tea was good for women's health. So she hoped to make a young, healthy girl infertile, and then planted pills on her. Nicholas was upset, he thought. Jennifer hadn't forgiven him for the slap. With a longing in his heart, he walked around the room where he smelled her perfume. Sitting down on the bed, he went through the pills. A suspicion crept into his soul. The packets were intact, every single pill in place. Perhaps Jennifer hadn't taken them. He remembered hundreds of moments when his wife had cried and complained about her mother and he hadn't believed it. The load at the opening struck his heart with the pain of irretrievable loss. He himself, with his own hands, had destroyed love. There is no forgiveness, but Jennifer, his beloved, without whom so lonely and dreary will be able to understand. He would rent a flat for her, and tomorrow he would go to the village to beg forgiveness. An Indian song was playing loudly in the next room. Camila smiled blissfully in triumph. She was more at ease when others were suffering, but her carefree life would not last long. One day she would receive a letter that would turn her whole life upside down, change her character, teaching her to be compassionate, to empathize, to do good. And now she was far from even a moment's regret for her dastardly deed. Nicholas did not immediately get out to the small town where his wife lived before marriage. He had to see the client's case through to the end. A week later, he took a week's holiday and went to see Jennifer. As 2 years ago, to go decided on a motorbike to return the former feelings. He did not inform his mother about his departure. He was offended by her. He tried to avoid talking to her. Camila looked anxiously at her dejected son, hoping that time would heal him. She was already looking for a worthy match for him, an obedient socialite who will distract her Nicholas from sad thoughts. His mother repeatedly tried to talk about divorce, but the son waved away, avoiding an answer. Nicholas settled everything, packed his rucksack secretly from his mother and left the house. It was a clear spring day. Johnson happily set off on his long-awaited journey. Soon he would meet his beloved, whom he missed incredibly. It seemed to him that just today their family would open a new page of life. They would be happy, for he loved Jennifer so much. The road was slippery from the past rain. Prudently, Nicholas wore a helmet, but the wheels could fail. But it did not stop the desire to impress his wife, to revive pleasant memories, move the voice of reason. Johnson accelerated, feeling a rush of energy, freedom and lightness on his soul. It was a 2-hour non-stop drive to the small town. The road went without tarmac, not a living soul. After an hour and a half, Nicholas carelessly slipped into the oncoming lane. At that time, a tractor appeared from behind the corner. It was too late to brake. Nicholas jerked the wheel to the left. The motorbike rammed the bushes, crashed into a tree. The brakes did not work. The wheels began to slip. Johnson was thrown out of the saddle, and he rolled down the slope from the road. He was unlucky with the driver. The driver of the tractor was ex-prison inmate Kevin Reed, who would not want to be investigated again. He braked, hoping to save the arrogant driver, but Nicholas showed no signs of life. So Kevin took his belongings, got back on, and drove off, leaving the motorcyclist to die. In the village, he said nothing about the accident, not even a twinge of conscience. It was an accident. The fault of the tractor driver was not really his fault, and humanity, unfortunately, is inherent in few people. The mother missed her son the same day. She found out that he had taken a week's holiday, and did not answer the phone. What a stubborn man, he went to his simple girl. Did she cast a spell on him? Camila knew where her daughter-in-law lived before her marriage, but she was not going to her. She decided that she would bear it for a week, and then she would see. She called her mother in the village and asked if her grandson had turned up. He hadn't. Her son's phone became unavailable, and after a week he still hadn't returned. She decided to go to the village herself, got to her mother, whom she rarely saw and communicated with even less often. The news was shocking. It had been a year since Nicholas had visited his grandmother, called Mrs. Cassandra. He hadn't come to the village a week ago, not yesterday, not the day before. "Do you know Jennifer, the postmistress?" Camila asked her mother. "She's your sister-in-law, your dear. Have you gone completely out of your mind?" The mother was silent, shaking her head. Something sly slipped into her gaze. "Jennifer hasn't been here in a year. She's moved in with you." "How?" "She's been divorced from my Nicholas for a fortnight. What better place to go than back home?" "She hasn't been here. We're next door to each other, 2 houses down." "Camila, don't make a mess. I know you. Where did you put the kids? They ran away from you, didn't they? They did the right thing." "I raised a bad daughter. You don't come here, you don't help your mother. If it wasn't for Nicholas, I'd be all alone. Mama, you never understood me, and I couldn't stand that simpleton. What use is she?" "I'm sorry, but I was raising my son. It was hard. He's back on his feet. He hasn't forgotten anyone, and he's my son. I raised him that way." "So you survived, Jennifer? I see you're a simpleton like me, or you've forgotten. What a character you have, Camila. I'm ashamed to have raised a daughter like that. Tell me what happened. Why did the kids run away from you?" "My son went to Jennifer's. I guess his motorbike isn't in the garage." "Where did it go?" "I don't know. I'm so sad." Camila couldn't hold back any longer. She clasped her hands and wailed. "Sonny, where are you, dear son? It's my own fault. My own fault. Let's go to Jennifer together. Maybe they're lurking there, living there. I'll tell you the address, but it's no use. I won't go. Go yourself and don't come back to me alone. It's easier and calmer. You go yourself, I'll call you if the children are found." Camila went to the address, but no one was home. She knocked. She went to the neighbors, but it was the same. Neither Jennifer nor her husband had been there for a year. Nobody had come or knocked. Camila went to the old habit to collect information in the town, in the shop, at the post office, at the club, but Jennifer as in water vanished. With a heavy heart, she returned to town, the trail broken. Acquaintances, friends didn't know where her son was. He never showed up for work. He didn't sign any resignation papers. Nicholas was irretrievably missing. The last desperate step was to file a missing persons report. Another year, she padded the thresholds of government agencies, visited her mother in a small town. There was no trace of her son. Later, remorse seized Camila. Nothing could dull the pain of loss. It was impossible to believe in the death of her son. So she lived lonely, remembering the moments when everyone lived together, though not always friendly. Let him live with that simple girl, as long as he was near. Now the house was hopelessly silent. Camila cried at the window all day long with an absent look, but she believed that her son would return. The story by the roadside had a sequel. Nicholas survived. He was rescued by the family of a healer from a small town in the neighborhood where Jennifer lived. It was a very small town of just a few houses. The only people left in it were old people. For all the necessary food things, so small things for the household drove and went to the neighboring town. On that fateful day, the daughter of the Hilowi went to the shop on the road. First, she saw a mangled motorbike, and a little further away she noticed Nicholas without feelings. What a grief, he must have crashed. What a handsome man he was. I sighed and shook my head. The girl, her name was Catherine, was trained in first aid, often helping her mother treat people. She checked and realized that the boy was alive, but it was not customary for healers to call an ambulance. They lived in the village as one family. In case of grief, they helped each other. So Catherine ran off to get help. Johnson was taken to Chloe's house. It wasn't good. The victim hadn't been conscious for a week. They searched around the motorbike, but they didn't find any ID, phone, or belongings. They were taken by a resourceful tractor driver, so that there would be no trace of them at all. He just took the things, but he burnt all the papers and even his passport. There was a man, and he's gone, missing. The unknown man came to his senses on the 8th day. A black-eyed beauty with a thick red braid was sitting beside him. When she saw that the sick man opened his eyes, she jumped up and cried out, "Mummy, he's awake, come here." A not young but stately woman came in, bent over him and held his hand. "My dear, you'll live now. Where did you come from? What's your name?" But Nicholas was so weak that he could not speak. He shook his head, trying to say something, but could not utter a word. "Catherine, go and get him some broth and tea. I guess he can't talk. Maybe he'll write something later." The man thought with horror that he couldn't remember his name. Moreover, who he used to be, who he even was, he doesn't know. He frantically fumbled around, trying to get up, mumbled and fell again without feeling. Later, he was given tinctures. The men brought his motorbike, collected parts from it, and wanted to identify the man by it, but somehow forgot about it. It's no use, they thought. After all, the village had hardly developed. A kind man, we need him. If he doesn't remember his former life, it's his fate. Catherine nursed Nicholas, fell in love with him without memory. He was also charmed by this extraordinary, caring girl of fabulous beauty. Over time, Nicholas began to talk a little, turned out to be skillful at all hands. Quickly learnt to build, put a log cabin for his native Catherine, equipped it, and so they lived together. Vague pictures of the past came to mind, but the whole did not add up. With some secret excitement, he looked at the cloudberries, and then everything was eclipsed, did not go further memory. Nicholas was no longer himself. He was given a new name, Norman, the papers of a long dead man, buried and not registered as dead. Norman Carter was born. For a long time he couldn't remember where he came from, who he worked for, or why he was on that road. Camilla Jones was still waiting for her son's return. Her maternal heart told her he was alive. It had been 5 years since his disappearance. Nicholas had been reported missing. The bleak days had been hard. It seemed as if nothing would happen until she died, but one day she received a letter. A very strange message came from Jennifer's address in a small town. There was only one word on a white sheet of paper, Cloudberry. What the hell is this? The mother-in-law shook the envelope, nothing more, shone the leaf on the window a blank. I told you she was a mad fool. The same day I left for the village. The first thing I did was to go to Jennifer's house. She didn't remember her son's story about how he met his wife. This time the door to the house was open and empty inside. She walked through the rooms as if no one lived there. Dust all around, cobwebs in the corners, the smell of a long uninhabited house. But in the midst of this emptiness, a brand new portrait of a sweet little girl stood on the windowsill. Camilla shuddered and cried, Nicholas's bottomless blue eyes staring back at her. Grabbing the portrait, she read the inscription at the bottom, Cloudberry on the back, Caroline Jones. It couldn't be that. How could it be? For 5 years I've been on my own, with my granddaughter growing up next to me. It was Jennifer, the wicked witch. She's the reason I lost my son and hid my granddaughter. What a bastard. Camilla howled as she looked at the photograph, stroked the face that bore the features of her precious Nicholas, and then sat down and wept. Tears of remorse poured down in streams. It was she herself who had driven the good girl away. She had given her wormwood to keep her from being a mother. But what a cruel fate. Jennifer's daughter was given to her, and everything was taken away from her. It's karma. Jennifer was wrong to do that. It was getting dark. There was no electricity in the house, so this was not where her daughter-in-law lived. Camilla stood up from the floor 5 years older, her heart bleeding. She walked to her mother's house and the door was open, wide open. No one inside, empty and desolate. She had not visited her mother for a year. She had given up hope of finding her son. She had stopped calling. Her mother had died without her. There's no one now, alone in the whole world. I'm sorry, Mom, I'm sorry. Where are you? Camilla clutched her temples and fell senseless. She woke up in the dark. There was a cold smell from the door. She had to find her granddaughter and Jennifer to find out what was wrong with her mother. There was no electricity in the house. She went into the kitchen. Like when she was a child, the candles were in a drawer. I lit them, put a glass, and sat alone in the semi-darkness on the chair where I sat as a small, carefree, mischievous girl 45 years ago. The glare played on the wall. The silence was incredible. The world froze here in an instant, in no hurry, no sacrifice required. What happened to her soul? The city had taken everything good out of her, made her a cruel and wicked girl. And it's not square meters, water from the tap that you need to stay alive. That's the feeling when you realize you're a real person. Only a small town can reveal the soul. Camila should have been born again, sitting alone on that chair, in the semi-darkness, which her mother had not thrown away because she had waited all her life for her daughter's return. In that moment, she came home with her whole soul. Grief helped her to realize the emptiness of her meaningless life. The clock ticked, as if counting down the time of rebirth. Night fell and business had to be postponed until tomorrow. Camila unraveled the prim bump on her head and braided her hair. She woke with the dawn in the morning, anxiously opened the wardrobe in her former room, going through the dresses she had worn when she was young. This was where she had lived until she got married and met a promising guy studying to be a lawyer. Later they left the small town and bought a one-room flat in the big city. The clothes were too small, no doubt. I slammed the doors, went into my mother's room, opened the wardrobe. Weekend dresses hung in rows. Everything was in perfect order, even the perfume hadn't weathered off. By old habit, her mother walked around the village only in skirts or dresses. Camila stood in indecision. She dared not take her mother's things. It was not clear what had happened. It was bad enough to wear the things of the deceased, but she would certainly be told that her mother was dead. Emboldened by this thought, Camila chose a plain, straight-cut monochrome dress and changed. The trouser suit she'd arrived in was angrily tossed into the dresser, as if a frog had taken off its skin, transforming into a beautiful maiden. In her 50s, Camila was a slim, beautiful woman, but the strict outfits, dark things aged her. Now she was happily fidgeting in front of the mirror, as if rejuvenated a dozen years in this simple old-fashioned dress. It was time to make inquiries, stock up on groceries, put the house in order. I went outside, dizzy from the marvelous country air. I stood enjoying the ringing silence. I went into the neighboring house. I thought how I hadn't thought to go to the house since the evening. The old owner was milking a cow. She looked in, startled to see Camila in her neighbor's dress. "Hello, Mrs. Kimberly." "Don't you be sick," too, the old woman muttered quietly. "Tell me, where's Mummy?" "It's fate to die with a daughter like that." "No way." "You, my dear, don't deserve to know the truth," said the neighbor harshly, turning away. "Tell me, I beg of you, is she alive?" Mrs. Kimberly stood up, picked up the milking pan, and strode to the porch. The silence dragged on. "Now, you get out of here. I've nothing more to say, and don't come here and say anything more. It's up to you to decide how you want to live your life. Michael, get Blanca out of here and get this one out of here too." She mumbled under her breath, but Camila heard her. She didn't get anything else. Michael, the neighbor's son, passed by without a glance and didn't speak. Camila stood there for a moment, crumpled, and then walked angrily away. She passed 5 other neighbors, 2 of whom had already left the small town. The houses were padlocked, the vegetable garden abandoned in high summer, everything overgrown with grass. The other 2 neighbors she knew couldn't explain anything. She said her mother had moved away. She didn't say where. But the small town was thriving. A new shop had opened. People were farming, putting the cattle out to pasture. The hospital was working. There was a poster on the local notice board advertising a holiday home by the river. Inquiries from the inhabitants led nowhere. Camila decided she had to start her life over. It was no coincidence that she received a strange message. A portrait of her granddaughter, changing will earn her forgiveness. Fate would have mercy on her. She decided to start with a temporary move. The flat in the city was on the alarm system. But she didn't have to worry. But she didn't take any things with her. Her old taste seemed unacceptable for the town. Camila Jones went round the shops, bought suitable outfits for work and everyday life. She spent the rest of the evening tending to the household, going through the kitchen utensils, all in a deplorable state, some chipped, some old, the floors cracked, the wallpaper unchanged for years. Now she realized what a poor state the house was in need of repair. She had not thought about it, having left her mother alone in the village. She only threw in a piece occasionally, sending money a couple of times a year. How did mother live here alone was unfathomable, and a bitter thought befell the neglectful daughter. What if her son had left her so alone? Would life have been easy? Her heart was troubled. How could she do that? No, she deserved everything that happened to her. You can't be selfish, thinking only of yourself. Things are going to be different now, she proclaimed into the void, wiping away her tears. She cleaned the house until evening, made a list of things to buy in the city. I thought I'd go to the local office to find out when my mother had last paid the light bill. It turned out that it was only like 3 months ago. The bills were paid. The landlady herself came to visit. Camila was wary, but the payment was accepted, and in the evening the electricity came on, illuminating the rooms with a cold, dim light. In the morning, Camila left for the city. She drove her car to the village, leaving it at the gate for the night. But after thinking a little, she went to her neighbor's house, sneaked into the house, knocked. It was open. The house was clean, spacious, everything was in order. It seemed that her son had done his best to repair the house, and it stabbed her heart that she herself had never helped anyone. The angry landlady was about to send her away. "Mrs. Kimberly, I'm sorry I've been mean. My bad." What a sly fox. "I won't tell you anything. Just so you know." "You're right, it's too early to forgive. Mother, I must find my son and granddaughter and front of them guilty." "So why did you come to me?" "Go back to your place. Nobody needs you here." "I decided to live here for the summer. I was invited," she muttered quietly, remembering about the letter. "What do you want from me?" "I'm going to town, to the hardware store. I want to make repairs to my mother. I came here to ask if you need anything to buy." "Buy them all. Have you decided?" Mrs. Kimberly grinned slyly. "It's out of the goodness of my heart. What can I do for you?" "Oh, my dear, I can't pretend to be angry for long. Come to me, I was babysitting you while your mother was at work." To her amazement, all Mrs. Kimberly's sternness was gone. She hugged Camila, wiping away her tears. "I'll write you a list, and I have to ask my son. He wanted to go into town too. Maybe he'll come with you." Mrs. Kimberly's son was a little older than she was. As children, they were friends and quarrelsome, annoying each other with mischief. At 15, Michael left his mother, going to school to study electrician, and then returned here to find a job, got married, made an extension to the house. We started a household and lived together. How painful it was for her mother to see it. Her daughter got married and never came back. "Hello, Michael." Camila finally found the right words. "Hi, Meanie." Michael smiled, remembering her past offenses. "I'm going to the city. Your mother has made a list. Maybe you should come with me too? You're not going to kill me?" The irony was uncalled for. When she was a child, she asked to drive his motorbike, but she lost control, drove off a bridge into a river. They were rescued, but the motorbike was banned. Michael didn't forgive her and stopped communicating altogether. He'd do little things, like scare me with caterpillars or drop off mice. "Don't worry, I've been driving for over 20 years. When my husband gave me a car for my wedding, I learned right away." "Did you bury your husband?" "My mother told me. Sorry to remind you." "It's all right. Where's your wife?" "She died. She went out on the ice in the spring. She wanted to rinse the laundry. It got sucked in. She was not saved." Michael said quietly and turned away. "I'm sorry, I didn't know. It was a long time ago. Let's go to town. Wait, I'll change." While Michael was getting ready, a girl with a bag over her shoulder ran up to Camila. "Hi, do you live in this house?" "Yes, I'm here to see my mother." "Here's a letter to this address. Please sign here." "Thank you, girl. Come and visit if you have time." "I've got to go. Goodbye." Camila Jones turned the envelope round. It had her mother's address on it, but it was addressed to Camila. She opened it anxiously, wondering if someone was trying to teach her a lesson or take revenge. On a white sheet of paper in large letters was the single word wormwood. Camila shrieked, dropped the sheet. Jennifer learned that by the evil machinations of her mother-in-law, she could have been left infertile. How could that be? Maybe she peeped on her while she was in the kitchen making her daughter-in-law's herbal tea. "What are you standing there with your mouth open?" Michael asked, approaching. Seeing the leaf, he picked it up, reading the strange message with amazement. "What is this nonsense? Did you get a letter? Your interlocutor is obviously a little verbal." Michael laughed, but quickly stopped. Seeing that, Camila stands in a daze with a lost look. "Let's go." The road was silent, not even music on. Michael was dozing in the passenger seat. Then he opened his eyes and blurted, "Your mom came to see us a week ago." "What?" Camila braked sharply, which almost bumped Michael's forehead. "Hey, take it easy. Drop me off. I'd rather walk. You're not very good at driving." "I'm sorry, but why didn't Mrs. Kimberly tell me?" "I was so worried. Do you know what I've been through? I buried her in my mind." "Don't shout." "What's going on?" Camilla said it quietly and pulled over to the curb. "I don't know. They were whispering in the kitchen without me, and my mother forbade me to talk about it. Don't ask me anything. I'm going to go. We're here." "Wait. I'll find out for myself. Don't say anything. Let's go." The shopping trip took longer than they thought. It was getting dark by the time they'd filled the boot in the back seat. Camila persuaded Michael to spend the night in her flat. He walked round the rooms for a long time with a look of amazement. "It's like a museum. What a place. You must have been crazy to live in the country. The living room alone is as big as your mother's house. Yeah, Mom's living in squalor and her daughter's living in luxury." "Michael, I know what I'm talking about. Come on. Here, you're going to sleep on the couch. Let's go. I'll feed you. Caviar and lobster. I'm coming." "Ugh, you furry hedgehog," she playfully replied with a childhood nickname. Camila thought that it was unbearable to live alone. Caring for others gave her energy. Michael was pensive, looking at his hostess with alienation. The evening was not going well. The guest was obviously hiding something from her, but Camila Jones did not question him, more him. The letters were leading her to some goal, like stages of a test she had to pass. Michael got up in the early morning and got Camila up. He would not leave his mother alone for long. He had to help with the chores. They came back when the neighbor had already put the cow out to graze. "Why didn't you come back yesterday?" "Every hour counts. I can't cope on my own, and it's scary to spend the night alone." She grumbled, then smiled and invited me to tea. We unloaded the shopping. Camila had brought a set of pots and pans as a present for her neighbor. She knew that pots and pans were the trouble with village housewives. Mrs. Kimberly sighed but accepted the gift. The hut was clean, cozy, and warm. The hostess brewed tea, put a wicker with lambs, jam, and honey. The quiet morning in the village was peaceful. Camilla took a sip of tea and looked at the hostess with bewilderment. "Something bitter." "It's bitter for you. Others must have been sweet, remember." "Is it with wormwood?" She choked and coughed up tears. "And you eat it with cloudberry jam. It won't be so bitter," Mrs. Kimberly said with a sly squint. Camila shuddered. Tears ran down her cheeks. She jumped up, ran out without looking at anyone, and ran away. Earlier it was impossible to be pierced by this. Nothing troubled her heart. She did harm to her daughter-in-law with a light hand. But now her conscience, which had been sleeping for many years, awoke and stirred her soul. She sat on the bench at the gate and could not calm down for a long time. There were no more thoughts, only tears flowed unrestrainedly, washing away the blackness that lived in her soul. Granddaughter Caroline was to relieve the bitterness of life. A little while later she went to sort out her things, then fiddled in the kitchen until evening, took everything out to the veranda, painted both the ceiling and the walls, having changed her mind about wallpapering. She just cleaned the floors, and contrary to village tradition, laid a carpet. The old kitchen furniture was falling apart, in need of repair. She persuaded Michael to help, who willingly patched the holes. Camila looked at Michael with admiration. He's a good man. In his 50s and early 50s, he's still a handyman. Michael laughed at the carpet and told her to paint the floors. "Help me set up the furniture. It's up to me to decide what to do." "City folk, you're all cuckoo." "Oh, for crying out loud." "All right, I'll keep the carpet for now, and I'll paint the floors later. You're going to throw that carpet away in 3 days. We'll watch you when you're on the river. I bought a Hoover you've never even heard of." Michael looked at Camila in a friendly way, jokingly pushing her, looking playful. "Oh, Michael, stop pushing me. We have grandchildren to nurse." "God didn't give me grandchildren." He said bitterly, "My son is a border guard. He won't show his nose. It's been 10 years since we've seen each other." "Son? I don't know anything about you. I don't know about anyone. I only cared about myself." After my mother died, he cut off all contact with us. He left like a ghost. He writes letters once a year. He settled down all by himself. He got a flat far away from us, but he didn't have a family. In an outburst of pity, Camila hugged Michael, and he suddenly responded, embraced her and kissed her on the lips. Camila was taken aback. "Have you eaten too much white wine in your old age? You know nothing. And I was in love with you as a child, and you city crazy first attacked me. Me? I don't need any more help from you. I'll see you around." Michael turned and walked away. He muttered to himself, "That's right. You're the one who's trying to teach me a lesson." "My what?" "Wait, spit it out." "You can't talk." Michael walked over to Camila, kissed her again, and left quickly. Camila Jones stood in a daze for a minute, then sat down to drink tea in the newly transformed kitchen, the surroundings sparkling clean. Michael had hung the chandelier she'd looked out for in the house, the pendulum clock on the wall, adding to the coziness. Only the old furniture spoilt the overall impression. So the furniture was worth updating. You could order yourself new sofas, a lounge, an armchair, a bed for Mum. How easy were these things to do now? Why hadn't she thought of Mum's comfort before? For a week, Camila made repairs, ordered furniture, while waiting for delivery, painted ceilings and walls. For more than 10 years, she had been sitting on the sofa with soap operas, and now she was working, impressing the neighbors with unprecedented vigor for a mature woman. In the evenings, her back and arms ached, but Camila did not complain. She was patient, glad that God had given her the strength for such an important work. During that week, Michael visited her more than once, helping with the repair of wardrobes, rearranging furniture. Camila got used to him. Communication became warm. More and more often he sat up late, remembered the past, made plans. Michael refused to talk about her mother. At parting, he hugged her like his own, but he did not allow any liberties, kissing her innocently on the cheek. On the 8th day, the renovation was finished. The old kitchen sets were dismantled for firewood. For her mother, she had chosen a color that was not stained, a pleasant shade of gray that gave the kitchen a new glow. With new furniture and fluffy carpets, the house began to play with magical colors. Having put all her energies into renovating the house, Camila exhausted her energy, fell asleep on the new sofa, and woke up to a knock at the door. The postmistress came. The game was dragging on. The relatives sent a parcel. She opened it anxiously. This time there was no message, just 2 jars with some contents. I opened them carefully and tasted. Wormwood and cloudberry are the same thing. It's a vicious circle. I chose the right path a long time ago. I renovated my mother's house. I realized what I'd done to my family. I lost my son. Tell me, haven't I suffered enough? Is it too soon to forgive me? It's too soon. You don't understand. You didn't lock the door, did you? They'll steal my beauty. You scared me. Camila shuddered. The door. What nonsense. What didn't I realize? You have to close the door. That's not what I meant. You just said that. I didn't say anything else. Are you all kidding me? No one. You're the one who did all the renovations. You don't want to talk about it. Go on. Don't make a mess. I just came by to help us with the housework. My mom asked me to. All right, I'll be back in an hour. Michael staggered a bit and went out. Camila cooked breakfast in her head, solving the problem she'd been given. If Jennifer knows of her intrigues, then Camila must go through it too. First to feel the bitterness of life, and then there will be hope in the distance and Hope and Cloudberry, her granddaughter. Camila twirled the jar of wormwood infusion, thought, and drank it down. She choked, drank water, and collapsed. By evening, Michael found Camila lying in the kitchen, sound asleep. There was no way to wake her up. He brought her to the hall, put her on the sofa. She looked charming in her sleep. He decided to stay close to her, to wait for her to wake up, so he locked the door. He walked to the kitchen. His eye caught a jar with some kind of potion on the bottom. He smelled something familiar, remembered the inscription in the letter he'd received recently, Wormwood, and thought that Camila's mother had overdone the punishment, but he wouldn't interfere. Let things take their course. They say that Camila herself has been scheming against her daughter-in-law for a year and a half, playing her with her fate and her relationship with her son. He switched off the light and lay down on the bed in the bedroom. fell asleep quickly in a sound, farmer's healthy sleep. Camila woke up when it was dark outside the window, surprised that she had no memory of the previous day at all. She opened her eyes and squealed in horror. A dark silhouette stood on her doorstep. She ran to the bedroom, closed the door, sighed, looked at the bed, the scream stuck in her throat. In the semi-darkness, she could see Jennifer sitting with her legs overhung, threatening her with her finger, whispering that she had ruined her unborn children. Jennifer. Jennifer, I'm sorry, for God's sake, it's all my fault, don't hold it against me. An ominous silence was her answer. When Camila looked up in fear, she saw that there was no Jennifer, but a man sleeping on the bed. She jumped up, her temples pounding, her head spinning. She listened, silence, only sniffling. Camila looked out into the living room. No one was there. Switching on the bedroom light, she breathed a sigh of relief. Michael, you scared me. But he was sleeping soundly as a baby, not waking up from his screams. Camila switched off the light and went into the kitchen. There was someone standing at the doorstep. A dark silhouette walked quickly towards Camila. Dazed with horror, she skidded back into the bedroom. But there stood the mother, with an angry expression on her face, moved her whole body, approached, threatened with a finger. Why have you ruined the children, you foolish daughter? She spoiled everyone's life, she herself is in silk. But she didn't think about her mother. Mummy, don't. I'm sorry, don't swear, I'll fix everything. Everything will be different. Her mother had almost reached her and stretched out her hands. Then Michael woke up. He saw Camila, who looked into the void and whispered in madness a plea for forgiveness. Camila, what are you doing? Camila finally saw that there was no one in the room but Michael. His shout made her eyes clearer, but the fear remained.
There's someone in the corridor.
Why did you drink wormwood last night? You can't have visions. Wormwood doesn't give you visions. Something's been spiked, that's what it is. And you can have the second jar. Camila flinched. Jennifer was talking to her. Cloudberries. Eat some cloudberries. Oh my God, it was Jennifer again. My head hurts. It's impossible. Let's go to Mum. She'll tell you what to do. Take the jar. Camila obediently got ready. She could still hear someone else's footsteps in the house. Shadows seemed to lurk in the corners. She fumbled, grabbing Michael by the arm. Has your mother let you go yet?
Just out of sleep, I think.
Mrs. Kimberly took the jar, sniffed and laughed. Well, darling, you'll be dreaming of things for a long time to come. Grebes for grebes, they should have called it. The neighbor laughed again, but sat her guest down. She fiddled with the herbs and poured some fragrant tea. Here, drink it. It'll make you feel better. You probably have a headache. Thank you. I hope it doesn't make me feel better.
If you don't want to drink it, get out of here.
Why are you being so strange, Mrs. Kimberly? You're always pushing me around. Now you're helping me. Camila, remember the basic truth. You can forgive anything, but you can't atone for the guilt of an innocent child. Camila to the house saw Michael, said that today with her babysitting will come in the evening. The woman entered the house anxiously, not noticing anything suspicious. Her head felt heavy, and she wanted to sleep. She fell asleep quickly, barely putting her head on the pillow. She woke up to her family's voice. Hello, daughter. Her mother was sitting on the edge of the sofa. Mum, hello, how I missed you. What a beauty you've made. I wish I'd done it before. It would have been so nice. Mum, I'm sorry, Camila cried, tried to get up but couldn't. She struggled on the sofa, opened her eyes, the cushion was wet. There was no one in the house, it was just a dream. But Mum, we'll meet for real. I'll change everything. My head was still heavy, dizzy, my temples ached. I went to the kitchen, took a jar of jam, twirled it around, tasted it by machine, struggled to do housework. After tidying up, she decided to cook something tasty, make some pies to treat Michael to in the evening. She had a secret sympathy for her neighbor. She felt at ease with him, as if he were her own. After an hour, she was surprised to note that her head was gone and her consciousness was clear. A burst of strength and appetite reminded her that she had quite recovered. Cloudberries helped. For after tea, Mrs. Kimberly had dreams. Camila was starting a new phase of her life, determined to find something to do so she wouldn't sit idle. She used to work under her husband in the prosecutor's office as a secretary. Together with Nicholas's father, they had made a fortune and become respected people in the city. But now Camila realized that no luxury could replace family. The longing for her son, the desire to see her granddaughter and meet her mother became the main value of her life. It was getting dark. Camila cooked some goodies and waited for Michael's arrival, and then, angry, decided to go to bed. There was a knock at the door, but instead of her neighbor, a girl came in and slipped her an envelope and disappeared. This made Camila completely angry. She wanted to throw the letter away, but she relocated herself, sat down and printed out the message. Many roads lead to redemption, but unfortunately not all of them are peaceful. Sounds like a threat. Came a man's voice over the top of her ear. Who's there? Camila shrieked in horror and jumped up sharply. Scaring you is my job. Michael laughed, genuinely laughing at his hostess. Did you do that on purpose? And I baked you pies, you will not get a single one. Get out of here. I'm an old woman. I have nerves, I have a weak heart. If I don't live to see my son and granddaughter, you'll be responsible for this sin. You know that, mark my word. You cursed me. You should close the door. What's the fashion? She came like a witch. I'll go to bed, mad woman. Wait. Sit down, eat. Woof. What are you doing? You're giving me commands like a dog. I'm sorry, I was only joking. Bring me your pies. Okay, but don't sneak around again. Next time I'll give my soul to God for sure. Don't be pompous, you've got another 30 years on you. What kind of treatment is that? Don't you have any other words for me? There are, but you'll like them even less. Don't say anything. I can't imagine what's going on in your head. You, Michael said with a sudden change of tone, and then added with a smirk, you, my love, are a pain in the arse. Camila Jones choked on her tea, coughed up tears, wanted to answer something, but instead sat silently, her eyes goggling. Have you lost your mind, you furry hedgehog? The suitor did not expect such a reaction. He wanted mutual recognition, warmth of relations, that she would lower her eyes modestly, take her hand and say that she needed him very much. Indignantly, he jumped up, ran outside, and Camila slumped into her chair. She herself had not expected such a reaction from herself. She was considered a reserved lady. Why did she have the country ways of a silly girl? After cleaning up the kitchen and closing the doors, she lay down. She woke up early, remembered last night with shame, and then fulfilled the promise she had made to herself. Before lunch, she went round the village looking for work. Everywhere they offered only temporary help in the household. Then she resolutely went home and changed her clothes. Redemption, that's what was needed. That's what the letter said. First, she went to Mrs. Kimberly's house to help with the vegetable garden. Then she went round the neighbors to make life easier for the old people. She didn't take any money for her work, and she refused to buy groceries. It was getting dark by the time she got home. Her back was sore from unaccustomedness, but she felt happy. For the first time in many days, she felt proud. As she approached the porch, she heard a rustling behind the house, a dark figure, a vision. She decided to see what was there, but after walking a few steps, she suddenly fell into a hole, hit her head on something hard, and lost consciousness. When I woke up, it was unclear what time of day it was, but it was dark all around. She turned her head and tried to get up, bumped herself, shrieked, felt around. There were wooden walls everywhere, boards on top. She was trapped in some kind of box. A cold, sickening sense of dread filled her. The hopelessness of it scared her deathly. Help me. Help me. Help. Camila screamed and thrashed hysterically. It seemed to her that an infinite amount of time had passed. Her body felt stiff, her head ached, but she took a full breath and calmed down. She remembered the words from the letter, not all roads to redemption are peaceful. It was too much, too much. You can't torture a person like that, you can't. Camila screamed and cried as she climbed to the top. Then she noticed that the lid was sliding. She pressed her hands and head against it, opened it with effort, was blinded by daylight, squeezed her eyes shut, then stood up. Her heart hammered and nearly stopped with terror. She was standing in a grave, in a coffin. It was a cemetery. From the last strength on weakening legs, she began to get out of the grave. At that time, the drunken watchman came running to her screams. When he saw someone climbing out of the grave, he almost had a stroke, but he ran up and managed to push Camila out of the grave. Ugh, damned zombie, sit with your ugly face, where your relatives put you. Despair seized the unhappy woman, but she guessed to talk calmly. Granddaddy and Granddaddy, be careful. She called out to the watchman. Oh, it's the evil one. Lord, forgive me. I've sinned. I repent. I swear I'll never drink again. Grandfather, I'm alive. I fell down. I was visiting my family, and here is an open grave. Grandfather, please help me, pitifully pleaded Camilla. A cunning zombie, pretending to be a human. He looked into the grave, saw Camilla there, in her black work clothes, with her tangled hair loose. Help me, you idiot, you stupid bloody fool. Get me out of here at once. She whispered in helplessness, as if hissing at her grandfather. Holy Mother of God, what a disgrace. The watchman ran away frightened, not stopping to cross himself. Well, and go, you heartless man, go yourself. On the third attempt, Camilla got out. The cemetery was deserted. Beyond it, a field, a path led somewhere, but where the village was, it was difficult to understand.
The roads to redemption are far from peaceful.
How did I even get here? How could anyone do this to a living person? I sat down by the roadside, braiding my hair, which seemed deliberately unraveled and tangled. In the ominous silence of the cemetery, thoughts of life and death came to mind. This is the end of everyone's life. How much in us is empty, unnecessary, contrived? The end of one in the grave, damp earth. As long as you're alive, you should not only think about yourself. I wasn't crying, it's just dumbness. There's a path ahead. Does it lead to a new life? I have to go through it. Maybe this is the road that's not peaceful. Mummy, tell me, are you playing games with me? How could you do such a thing? Camilla knew the answer. She had forgotten the way to her mother. It was time to go back. That's where the soul would be born again. She mentally forgave for everything. This redemption was important. She would overcome any difficulties and beg for forgiveness. The path led to the road. Only no one passed by. In about 15 minutes, Camilla was exhausted. She was thirsty and her legs ached. She sat down on the side of the road and decided to wait for a car. A tractor appeared, and by some fateful coincidence, Kevin was behind the wheel, and he agreed to give her a lift to the village for a small fee. Camilla breathed a sigh of relief, then noticed a familiar rucksack at her feet, leaned over and twirled it, horrified to see the secret embroidery on the strap, which she herself had customized for her son, Nick Johnson. Stop this right now. Tell me where you got that from. I found this rucksack on the side of the road. It was a long time ago. I don't remember when. Tell me the truth. Camilla went after the driver, slapped him. Kevin didn't stand for it, got out and threw the woman out of the tractor and drove off. Camilla Jones made her way to the village in tears. She was determined to find out for sure. There was a glimmer of hope of finding her son. His rucksack is here, so Nicholas has arrived. He and Jennifer are not far away. They're making fun of her. When she reached home, she locked herself in the dark and fell into a heavy sleep. Michael came to her more than once, but could not get through. Camilla woke up for the first time late in the afternoon, heated water, washed herself properly, and ate with appetite. Life was coming back to her. The apathy of the last few days had subsided. She got dressed up and took her documents, deciding to go to the neighborhood policeman. Hello, 5 years ago my son went to this small town but never returned. Wait, said the officer on duty. I'll call a neighborhood policeman to you, and you'll make a statement with him. The woman waited for an hour. Then she was invited into the office. Hello, Richard Gray, the district police officer. What do you want to see us about? Camilla Jones gave a detailed account of the events of the last 5 years. She described yesterday's incident in detail. She was asked to write a statement, promising to sort out the rucksack. Called in the evening, told to report to the station, refused to search. Kevin Reed showed a brand new rucksack with no embroidery. The house was searched. Nothing was found. A clever bloke figured out what was going on, got rid of the stuff, burnt it in the backyard. Camilla did not achieve anything. The trail was broken, but she did not take the statement. The policeman angrily escorted the woman out, stiffly telling her that Nicholas was missing. Camilla did not give up. She decided to turn to Michael for help. She needed to nail this Kevin guy to the wall, but the neighbor refused to help. Are you crazy, going to an ex-prisoner with a war? Just take it easy. It'll work itself out. Don't you realize that's my son's rucksack? I haven't seen him in 5 years, and this Kevin Reed guy is obviously making trouble. If you don't help me, I'll go to him myself. No, you can't stop, and anyway, where the hell were you yesterday? Helping out in the garden for free again. Yeah, I was helping out, digging in the ground. She didn't want to say anything so she wouldn't scare Michael. Let's face it, I don't need it. It keeps my mind off my dark thoughts. They stood on the doorstep, arms around each other, as if they were young, with all the burdens off their shoulders. People who had passed the test, forgiven each other for the present and the past. Mrs. Kimberly was calm, but only told him to help with the household chores as before. The new message arrived 2 days after the cemetery. Camila was already expecting it and opened it without excitement. It was a postcard with an invitation to visit the holiday home by the river. Michael took the news calmly. Mrs. Kimberly sighed mysteriously, smiled imperceptibly. They both knew the landlady of this inn. Camila had one last test ahead of her. Michael refused to go with her no matter how much she begged him. He remained adamant. Camila hastily packed, took the invitation card and set off on her journey. The journey was not long, about an hour. The good road changed to a road without tarmac, and it became more difficult to drive. Every now and then the car bounced. Finally, a holiday home appeared in the distance, occupying an impressive space. Several hunting lodges and a 2-story building were located along the river. At the gate, the guard let her through without question. Driving into the territory, she read the name. In bright red letters on the building was written Cloudberry. 5 years ago, Jennifer Jones had found herself on the street because of her mother-in-law's dastardly scheming. The biggest blow was her husband's betrayal. Did not believe, did not support, kicked out as a mean woman. She could not bear it. Her heart was broken. There was no point in living any further. Without a shadow of a doubt, she stepped on the road, but a man who was passing nearby, a second before the irreparable, pushed Jennifer away. She only hit her head, but still went to the hospital. The doctor told the unbelievable news. The girl was pregnant. Only this saved Jennifer from the monstrous pain on her heart. She wiped her tears and decided to live against fate. She did not want to return to her husband. She could not forgive the betrayal. There was only one way back to her homeland, to her native small town. When Jennifer returned, she tidied up the house and cried for 5 days after being locked up. It was worth it to get her life together for the sake of her child. After relocating herself, she drove into town and quit her job at the shop. Camila's mother, Nicholas's grandmother, the same Mrs. Cassandra, met Jennifer at the shop and told her to tell her the truth. They were not only neighbors. Jennifer often helped with the household. Nicholas's grandmother came to visit. The girl became a native for a lonely woman, but Camila did not know it and did not see beyond her nose. In the evening, the pregnant Jennifer could not resist and told Mrs. Cassandra at length what she had been through in the past year and a half. The neighbor wept, unable to believe the meanness of her own daughter. Then the old woman took Jennifer in to help her through this difficult time. The girl got a job in a bakery and managed to help her patroness as well. When Camila came in search of traces of Nicholas and Jennifer, the daughter-in-law was in the next room. She also bribed the people of her town to make her mother-in-law think Jennifer had not returned to the village. Not for a second did the daughter-in-law feel sorry for her mother-in-law, but the news about Nicholas disturbed her. She began her search. The first attempts to find her husband were in vain. 7 months later, Jennifer gave birth to a daughter and named her Caroline. One day, walking on the riverbank, the girl thought how good it is in a small town. From the big city you can rest. After all, it is a very good idea to build a house on the shore, so that in it the inhabitants of the big city could have a rest. This thought she shared with Mrs. Cassandra. To her great surprise, she brought the whole 2 million wrapped in a cloth. Wow, where did you get that kind of wealth? I've been saving, Camila's been throwing money at me like a dog and I can't spend it. She wouldn't show her face to me for 5 years. Only Nicholas used to come round and leave me some money too. I saved up. I wanted to give it to a good cause or a church. I don't need anything myself. Take it. I'm sorry to you. You've suffered because of my daughter. Thank you. It's not just for me. It's for you and a good cause. After consulting a lawyer from the city, Jennifer got a permit and bought a plot of land by the river. The first house came out small. At first, Jennifer didn't think it would be anything worthwhile. She advertised in the city. People showed up, buying places 2 months in advance. A year later, two two-story buildings were built, supplemented with hunting lodges. The demand did not fall, and the profit grew. For the summer, Jennifer and her grandmother moved into a cabin built especially for them. All the while, the girl continued her search. She knew that Nicholas never returned home. From work, he was expelled because of a long absence. Jennifer traveled all over the county in search of her husband. Once she remembered the godforsaken farm, Nicholas, who lived under the name Norman, remembered the past in scraps. Once he had easily settled a dispute between men by reciting lines of law that popped up. After that, people began to go to him for minor matters, to secure their property by law, or to register land, to fill out documents. It became clear, not just a guest was sheltered. Over time, Nicholas cooled to his common law wife. An unknown anxiety was troubling his soul. He went to the river all day fishing, wistfully recalled the same village, his grandmother. Pictures of the past life gradually returned to him. Catherine immediately realized that Norman began to avoid her. The stern girl packed her things and returned to her mother. Nicholas Jones has not thought to return that one. Only suffering he brought is indifference. There, in the depths of memories, woke up feeling for the mysterious girl with a basket of cloudberries. He saw her in a dream, walking along the road. Then everything was cut off by a black cloth. So he suffered for another 6 months, remembering the past in fragments. He found out where he was found, and the next day, without informing anyone of his plans, was going to go to his native small town. In the morning, he got up early, got on his motorbike, and drove away. It had been almost 2 years since he had crashed before reaching his destination. Now he knew for sure that this journey had to be completed. That same day, Jennifer arrived at the farm where Nicholas lived. She went round 5 yards before they dared to tell her the truth about the accident. Jennifer was taken to Nicholas's house, but no one was there. The villagers threw up their hands and invited her to visit. She could finally tell who they had sheltered, they in their village. Nicholas pulled onto the road, read the signs, looked around, then stopped his gaze on the cars that occasionally passed by. He remembered, instantly refreshed, the memory of that fateful day when a tractor had driven at him on this very spot. Jennifer, a sharp pain stabbed at his heart. How will you be without me? He guessed that all the misfortunes had befallen them, only because of his own mother. One planted packet of pills and a fictitious note had ruined an entire family's life. Nicholas took a long time to come to his senses, hesitant to continue on his way. He walked between the trees, horrified by the abyss in which he had lived for the last 2 years, as if he had come out of a coma. Finally, he decided to go to his grandmother to comfort her. It seemed to him that an eternity had passed. When he reached his grandmother's doorstep, he ran into the veranda. Towards him, hearing the motorcycle, ran out Mrs. Cassandroy. Both were crying and laughing. "Nicholas, you're alive," I felt, "my darling. That you were coming back, that you were alive. Let me look at you. You've grown up. Grandma, you're still the same. Don't cry. It's all right. Everything will be different now. How could you torture us like that for 2 years? Didn't your heart tell you? Didn't you feel sorry for your family? I just remembered you today, Grandma. Where's Jennifer? She went to look for you. You don't know anything, Father. She gave me a sly grin and led me into the house. Caroline, come and meet your father." Nicholas saw a little girl looking with clear blue eyes. Daughter. He exhaled and burst into bitter tears again. Kicked out his pregnant wife. For 2 years she was alone without him. The girl shook her uncle's hand and ran off to play. She was brought up by her mother and grandmother. She was too young to understand the complexities of life. Where's Jennifer? Jennifer went looking for you? She's been looking all the time. She went to the farm. Nicholas shuddered as he missed his wife. That fate was confusing them. He decided to wait here for her return and had a long talk with his grandmother. Mrs. Cassandra bitterly told him that not only Jennifer but also his other girls had been turned away from her son by his mother. Camila once even repented in a fit of despair about how she had separated her son from Jennifer, how she had written a letter to her son on his behalf, how she had wanted to make him infertile. Nicholas could hardly believe that his mother had arranged the meanness. A lump came to his throat. In vain, he didn't believe his wife, defended his mother. Because of her, he had almost lost his life, his wife and his daughter. Grandma, You can't let it go. I don't want to see or know her again. Jennifer returned late at night, approaching the house, saw Nicholas's motorbike, dazed, burst into tears and rushed into the house with all her might. Bursting in, she threw herself around Nicholas's neck because she knew her lover had not betrayed her. Caroline ran to her mother and started beating Nicholas with her palms, afraid that her uncle would hurt her mother. They decided to all live together, but moved into a holiday home, which needed owner supervision. Mrs. Cassandra stayed on, promising to move in with her grandson and great-granddaughter later. The holiday home prospered, growing. Nicholas's help proved invaluable. They correctly registered the property, expanded, wisely conducted business. Nicholas called his daughter Cloudberry and spent all his free time with her. The girl did not dote on her father, attached to him with all his heart. For 3 more years, Nicholas did not want to hear anything about his mother. Time has softened him a little, and he decided to forgive his mother. But only by changing would she be forgiven. Nicholas himself devised a plan of redemption. Jennifer and grandmother accepted the proposal to teach her mother a lesson, not immediately. It seemed too cruel a way to bring Camilla to her senses. Come on, Nicholas, Mom's been through enough. 5 years since she lost you. Jennifer, she didn't even spare our future children. Nicholas, I never drank her teas. It was impossible to drink that stuff. Sometimes she switched the decoction, sometimes she poured it out. It was disgusting. What did she use for wormwood? Let her drink the wormwood herself. It was like this. Nicholas had been living at the house of Mrs. Kimberly, a neighbor. When Camilla came to the house, the son was in the back room, a few meters away from his mother. He was glad to have her around, alive and well, but changing her character was more important than meeting her. For the time being, Mrs. Cassandra had moved into Jones's house at the holiday base. Nicholas wrote a message, changing his handwriting beyond recognition. He wanted his mother herself to feel a little of what Jennifer had experienced. It didn't seem enough for him to just confuse her. He invented a whole epic of redemption, remorse, separation from his granddaughter, the bitterness of loneliness. The cloudberries and wormwood were also prepared by Mrs. Kimberly, and the wormwood was laced with sleeping pills and hallucinogenic grapes. It seemed unnecessary, superfluous, but Nicholas persuaded his neighbor, as it could do no harm. At the pharmacy, they took a remedy for poisoning, which they mixed into the cloudberries. Nicholas came in the night when his mother drank a decoction of wormwood, worried how she felt. But it turned out that the son only aggravated the situation, scaring the mother to death. The story of the repairs and help stunned Nicholas. It was beyond his plans, but it was a good sign. Camilla changed beyond recognition, began dating Michael. The neighbor was against this punishment, but he could not change anyone's mind. He only supported Camilla in her troubles. The hardest step for the son was the story of the cemetery, but once he himself cheated death, as if born again, he looked at everything with different eyes. He wanted to make his mother feel the same way. The hole was not deep, but he forgot to put the shovel away. Camilla hit her head, but not badly. Nicholas gave her a shot with sleeping pills and took her to a pre-prepared hole in the cemetery. There was indeed a man to be buried there, so the grave was dug. He hastily chipped something that looked like a coffin, more like a box with a lid easily removable from the inside. He had even carefully placed a pillow. Later, Nicholas was horrified at what he had done, but remembering that Jennifer had lived in hell for 1.5 years, and then almost lost a child, he calmed his conscience. He waited anxiously for his mother's return. He knew that the local people would pick her up on the road, the lust for life would take its toll. Camilla returned in a deplorable state, and then went to the police station. But Richard Gray knew Nicholas's story, and even befriended him, sometimes using his legal knowledge. He rang Camilla's son beforehand and asked what to do. That way Camilla didn't find out ahead of time that Nicholas was alive. Perhaps the son's decision to leave his mother in the dark was too cruel. For 3 years he held a grudge. He couldn't forgive. Only Jennifer, P, and Grandma softened his heart. They sympathized with Camilla with all their souls, several times wanted to tell her that Nicholas was alive, but did not dare to interfere. The long-awaited moment had come. Camilla Jones arrived at their holiday home and entered the main building. There was no one in the lobby. An Indian tune was playing. She looked around, saw the television, and was taken aback. Pictures of her granddaughter, mother, daughter-in-law, and son were changing one after another. "Nicholas," she whispered quietly, tearfully. "I'm sorry, Mum." A familiar voice sounded behind her. Camila turned round, saw Nicholas, shrieked and fell senseless. She had to call an ambulance. Later it got worse. They took her to the city clinic. The woman had suffered a stroke. Nicholas could not believe what was happening. Instead of a happy reunion and family reunion, he drove his mother to the hospital. Silenced, Mrs. Cassandra, without a word, packed up, left for her home. The magical transformation of the dwelling echoed painfully in her heart. Her daughter had lovingly furnished it. She had made a miracle with her own hands. The old mother sat on the new sofa, thinking that not so long ago Camila had slept here. "I forgive you, my daughter," she said tearfully. She lay down on the sofa and fell asleep and never woke up again. In the evening, Mrs. Cassandra was visited by Michael as usual, but it was too late. He broke the sad news to the Johnsons. 3 days later, the funeral took place. Half the town gathered to say goodbye. Nicholas and Jennifer cried uncontrollably. Cloudberry screamed loudly, unable to understand why her beloved grandmother had been buried in the ground. Camila was discharged a week later. Still recovering from the blow, she tried to speak, but nothing came out. She could hardly move, mumbled and cried. For the first time, the family lived at Mrs. Cassandra's house. Nicholas nursed his mother, gave her massages, made her do exercises, and in the evenings got on his motorbike and went somewhere. He couldn't forgive himself for the anger he harbored towards his mother. Whatever she was still his own. He himself is just as bad a person. He himself must go on a journey of redemption. His mother's illness, his grandmother's death, and the weight of guilt heaped on his shoulders. Michael came to Camila, took her in his arms, put her in the pram he had bought for her, and they walked together along the river. After 2 months, Camila began to speak and walk on her own. "Michael, I want to go home."
Where to?
"And to the city." "And your son, your granddaughter? Are you coming with me?" "How can I leave my mum?" "You'll visit her. We'll get her a helper." Michael was really attached to Camille. After some thought, he agreed. The next day, while Nicholas and Jennifer were at work, they left for the city. Nicholas was informed of the move by Mrs. Kimberly, shook her head sternly, and from then on stopped all communication with him. 10 years passed. The young, beautiful Cloudberry, who was now called Caroline, graduated from high school and entered teacher training college. Over time, Camila thawed out, recovered. In the city, she took rehabilitation courses at the best clinic. For the summer, she and Michael moved to the countryside, visiting Nicholas. Mrs. Kimberly lived in the city for 5 years next to her son. She passed away quietly, with God's blessing, buried next to Mrs. Cassandra. They were neighbors as well as they ever were. The family council decided that Caroline would now live in town like a queen. They entrusted her with the ancestral flat. Michael and Camila sold the house in the village, gathered their savings, and went traveling. There were too many painful memories here. The Johnsons Jr. sold Mrs. Cassandra's house, deciding to leave the small town. They bought a condo in Florida, hired a manager for their holiday home base, and moved in. They visited their daughter almost every month, until she graduated and got a job in their small town as a primary school teacher. Camila and Michael come to visit to see their granddaughter. They traveled all over the United States and then went to live by the sea. Over time, the holiday home passed to Caroline, who remains faithful to the land where she was born. Every summer she comes to the cemetery with a basket of cloudberries to visit her grandmother. John was happy today. He had finally made up with his fiancée, Christina. In fact, John didn't fight with her at all. Christine had a tendency to get offended and throw tantrums on the spot, as is typical of rich, spoiled girls. But he loved his beauty and did not notice unpleasant flaws in her character, like all lovers. That's why, when John saw a flower stall shining with colorful lights, he stopped his serve to buy the most luxurious bouquet he could find there. After all, Christina had fine taste and high demands, so a bouquet from the supposedly guilty John had to match her status. However, the mood was still spoiled when he came out of the store with a huge bouquet and did not find his car. Such surprises were not to his liking. "Where's my car?" "What kind of mayhem is this?" he shouted to a road worker who was painting the curbs nearby. "Didn't you see the sign or what? Parking is forbidden here." "Your car was taken to the parking lot," the worker replied. "I have a fiancé waiting for me at the restaurant. I can't be late. And I left my phone in the car. I went out for 5 minutes. How can you do that?" Yeah, they all go out and get divorced like that. Shit, the parking lot's around the corner. Pay the fine and go to your fiancé. It's a piece of cake. Here comes a major with flowers. He won't let people do their jobs, said the road builder. John did not answer him. Every minute was precious to him. But why did he have such bad luck today? He took the bouquet under his arm and ran. And when he saw the sign penalty parking lot, he rushed to the booth where the officer on duty was sitting. I have my car brought to you here now. A black SUV. Here's the paperwork. I need to pick it up right away. I'm late for an important meeting. No problem, replied the parking lot employee on duty. Pay the fine, take your swallow, but I only accept cash. Writing out the receipt and looking for change from the large bill John had given him to pay seemed like an eternity. You can have change already. Keep the money. I'm really in a hurry, John said, pleased with the turnaround. The guard obligingly showed him where John's impounded car was parked. The lot itself, where the cars were located, was untidy and shabby. It was evident that the guard had a shoddy attitude. The cars were arranged as they were. One gate was open. His automobile stood a little farther back. The guard took the pads off the wheel and was about to leave, but John stopped him. Why is the car door open? He asked the guard. I don't know. Maybe you forgot to lock it. What? I sure didn't leave them. You can look on the cameras, and the keys were definitely there. John slapped his forehead. You've got to be so careless. There's someone in there. Look, the guard exclaimed fearfully and pointed his finger at the interior of the car. Suddenly, from inside, someone's palm lay on the glass. It was covered with blood. The hand disappeared, leaving a bloody trace on the car window. And then there was a heartbreaking, inhuman scream. It was a woman. John rushed to the car and opened the back door. What he saw shocked him. He froze for a few seconds and stared in horror at what was happening. Mother dear, you have an incident here, shouted the watchman, peering out from behind John's shoulder. Help, I'm going to die, shouted the young girl as loud as she could, and passed out from the pain. Run, call an ambulance and then get some hot water in here, John Watchman shouted in a commanding voice. He began frantically rummaging through the first aid kit. Finding alcohol, he put it to the laboring woman's face. She woke up. John put a pillow under her head and clean disposable sheeting under her lower body. Luckily, he had a whole pile of them. He often had to carry his dog in the car. There were also clean sheets and towels, which John had luckily picked up from the dry cleaners today. Don't be afraid, breathe. What did the midwives or whoever it is that deals with pregnant women teach you? My name is John. He tried to somehow distract the young woman from her fear. Sarah, my name is Sarah. She began to have contractions. She screamed and squeezed John's hand with such force that he thought something crunched. And then he himself cried out in pain, either from fright at the stranger screaming like a wounded animal, or it was already time. But a second later the baby's head showed. Now push, John shouted, oblivious to his own pain. Come on, it's going to be okay. And help is on the way, and so the baby was born, a red, defenseless lump with clenched fists. John picked him up, slapped him on the butt to make him cry and take his first breath. Then he wrapped the baby in a clean sheet. John thanked God to himself that he had bought a SUV that was so warm and spacious. Boy, you've got a boy, John announced joyfully. Sarah smiled, but immediately a grimace of searing, unbearable pain contorted her face again. Mommy, she screamed. And again the exertions began in a wave. Another child was born. Also a boy, but only a little smaller. He cried on his own and began waving his tiny hands. John quickly swaddled him too. The babies fell silent, warmed in the warmth of the car. Sarah lay exhaustedly under the blanket John had offered. Thank you. Without your help I'd be lost. My darling sons. I'm so glad everything's all right. Oh, I'm so thirsty I can't stand it. And John quickly gave her some mineral water. She greedily drank half a bottle and smiled again. I'm sorry I got your car dirty. The contraction started on the way, and I was carrying my suitcase. I saw the car standing there, and I pulled the door open. I thought, whatever happens, happens. I sat on the back seat, and then I don't remember anything. I guess I blacked out from the pain, and there you are, my hero named John O. I soiled all the seats for you. I'm sorry, come on, what's the chair? The main thing is that the boys are fine, they're all alive, and you did a good job. I almost fainted. Honestly, John laughed. How's it going in here? A guard ran up to them with a belated basin of water. There's an ambulance coming. Wow, you had 2 babies at once. What a mother. A minute later, doctors and a paramedic arrived and carried Sarah into the ambulance. Twins, John shouted. And for some reason, without knowing why, he felt proud of himself. It was as if they were his children. And it was true. There were no other people's children. I thought I'd give Christine a hint that it's time to become parents. "Where are you taking them?" John asked the ambulance driver. "To Central City," he replied briefly, and turned on the siren. And John stood and looked at the little people he did not know, the little people he had had a hand in saving. His soul overflowed with joy for Sarah and her sons. Of course, John felt proud of himself. He had not expected himself to be so fearless, and was determined to have at least 3 children. With this news and the desire to share the unusual event, John went on a date with Christine. Arriving at the restaurant exactly 2 hours late, he realized that the bride had already left. "And you have a note from Mrs. Barnova," the waiter said, handing John a doubled folded piece of paper. The smile slid off his face as soon as he read the contents of the message. It read as follows: "How could you? I waited for you for an hour. During that time, I realized that you don't care for me at all. Why do I need such a fiancé? What a businessman. My father has more money. And you're not that handsome? You know, I'll find someone better. You bet I will. Good luck. Loser." After these words, John became completely upset. His strength had left him. And no wonder. The day had been absolutely crazy. Not everyone could handle so many problems at once. For some reason, he didn't want to call Christine and make excuses. To withstand the onslaught of his fiancée, you need energy, which he didn't have right now, like a dead battery. But John knew what could restore his strength: a faithful friend waiting for him at home in a hot bath. Half an hour later, John was in the garden of his 2-story house, which he had also taken part in building, anticipating the aroma of birch broom and bath steam. The first thing John did was to flood the small wooden bathhouse in the backyard. Only now he felt how hungry he was when he entered the house. A fluffy whirlwind came at him with a joyous bark. It was Caesar, John's dog, who had recently turned a year old. He was a most faithful companion to his master. "Did you miss me?" John hugged the dog and ruffled his thick coat. Caesar barked merrily and wagged his tail. Then he stood on his hind legs and licked the face of his beloved master. And a couple minutes later, the dog was scrabbling at the door with his paw, hinting that he needed to leave to go about his doggy business. "Okay, you go for a walk, and I'll make you and me something to eat," John said tiredly. There hadn't been a crumb in his mouth since morning. While Caesar ran around the yard and chased the neighbor's cats off the property, John made a simple bachelor's dinner: scrambled eggs and bessia, and a vegetable salad. A good piece of meat with a bone was defrosted for Caesar. Smelling the food through the open kitchen window, Caesar began to beg for home, notifying the neighborhood with his barking that it was time for a snack for such a smart boy and master. "Come on, Stray." John smiled and put a bowl full of food in front of his friend. He licked his master's hand in gratitude. "Why, Caesar? Feel better about yourself? My fiancée left me today and didn't even give me an explanation," John complained to him. "You're the only one who truly loves me and will never betray me. It doesn't matter to you whether I'm rich or poor, handsome or not so handsome. You just love me and that's it." I laid John's head in my lap, as if taking his pain away. Caesar came into the house quite by accident. John had found him at a construction site he was managing. He was just a little puppy, a tiny, half-naked lump who couldn't crawl. He just whimpered, starving and cold. John picked him up, put him in his breast pocket, and took him to the vet. Then the doctor shook his head and said that the newborn was unlikely to survive. But just in case, he prescribed vitamins and antibiotic shots. John didn't give up. He took the puppy out, gently looked after it, and gave the injections himself. In 2 weeks, the puppy was walking, waddling unsteadily on stubby legs. But he ate for 5 people, which made his belly swell to such an extent that the poor dog would laughingly fall over on his side. Experts, having examined the dog, decided that it was a mix of a Caucasian sheepdog with a yard dog. Apparently, the breeder threw out a poor-quality puppy, having separated it from its mother, because no dog in the world will abandon its cub of its own free will. In addition, the dog discovered one interesting peculiarity. At the same time playing with the ball, he could listen to music and sing along. Subtle. For this he was named Caesar. A couple hours later, the companions were each asleep in their own beds. John on the couch, still undressed from fatigue, and his 4-legged friend suddenly collapsed next to him on the rug. And no force, even in the form of the beautiful Christine, who hated Caesar, could separate the 2 friends. In the morning, the phone rang. John jumped up like a scalded man. It was 0900 hours. He had overslept for the first time in his life. "Boss, where are you? Why aren't you picking up the phone?" Worried, the assistant asked. "I had to hold a meeting without you and tell the directors you were sick. What happened? Need any help?" "Oh, sure it happened. Like lots of things," John said in a tired voice. "Yesterday, for example, people were born right in my car. Can you believe that? And then I got dumped by a hot girl on top of that. Just like that." "Yeah, business," Mike replied after a short silence. "Are you okay?" By the way, do you know what you can carry to the maternity ward? Well, what should be carried in the gears? Maybe some things. You have a daughter, don't you? Well, ask my wife and send you the list. Well, you're really something, brother. Who was even born? Mike laughed. Two tough little men, John said and smiled, remembering the babies from yesterday. He suddenly had a strong desire to see Sarah and her newborn babies. Besides, he was curious to know how the young mother had gotten herself into such a strange situation. Having received the list and bought a lot of things, he hurried to the maternity hospital, where yesterday's acquaintance was taken. Seeing the man with huge bags, the nurses became animated. Oh, what a generous father. And who are you going to, young man? The midwife asked. To Sarah's. She gave birth to twins in my car yesterday, John replied cheerfully, and was surprised at the midwife's change in face. In the car, one of them asked, rounding her eyes, and here we thought she was homeless. It's not like she had anything with her. He didn't even have a maternity card, and I bet the poor thing didn't go through any of the women's clinics. We had to put her in an overcrowded room. John felt uncomfortable with the judgmental stares of the women in labor and the clinic staff. That's not my wife. And I'm not a daddy, he said. It just happened. Then why was a stranger giving birth in your car? Asked the old midwife. Well, now I know him. Where's Sarah? John replied. When he entered the room, he immediately identified where she was lying. Next to her was a completely empty bedside table. The other women in the room were full of groceries, clothes, and care products for themselves and their babies. It was obvious that their husbands and relatives had visited them. Sarah, on the other hand, had no one. She was wearing an old, long hospital gown and a lonely glass of water on the table. John's heart ached at the sight. He felt so sorry for Sarah. Hello, heroic mother, he said with deliberate cheerfulness. John walked over to the bed where she was lying, her back turned to the wall. Oh, John, she said, well, you've come. Is all this for me? What's all this for? It was obvious that she had been crying recently. Her eyes were slightly puffy, reddened. John marveled at the warmth and simplicity with which Sarah greeted him. That's not all. There's a lot of stuff in the car. I'm not a stranger to you after all. Why are you crying? I'm just a little upset. I'm remembering my useless life. I've been running around in rooms lately. I worked in Chicago as a dishwasher. They paid me pennies, and then I couldn't even afford a place to live. I had to sleep in train stations or homeless shelters. Was it scary? I was all alone. And here I see, everyone visits moms with babies. No one needs me, Sarah sobbed. Your sons need you, John reassured her. Yes, they do. He's right, of course, but we'll have nowhere to go. My fiancé turned me down. My stepdad kicked me out of the house, said he didn't need any freeloaders, but he's drinking with his buddies, drinking our stuff. It's my mom's apartment. Actually, it was fine when she was alive. And now, oh, my poor sons, and Sarah wept bitterly. John had to lift her up to comfort her. He felt he had to help her. Look, here's an idea John suggested. Let's say I hire you as a manager, and now I'm paying you sick pay and maternity leave. Tomorrow I'll get you a payroll card with your passport and rent an apartment for you and the boys. Are you okay with that? Oh, Sarah couldn't believe her happiness and froze for a moment, staring at John with wide open eyes. I'd be happy to work for you. Thank you. Taking her passport from her, John went to the office, where he instructed his assistant to handle Sarah's employment and compensation. Meanwhile, enthusiastic women gathered around Sarah's bunk. What a man, admired her roommates. Look, Sarah, hold on to him tightly. Do not miss such a golden man. Come on, girls, I cannot take advantage of his kindness and impose on mistresses. It's not fair. I was just hired, she replied modestly. The neighbors only smiled. It is true what they say, that from the outside you can see what is going on and who likes who. Well, winked the oldest of the women in labor. Sarah just waved her hand and began to look at the presents. The next day, John visited her again to check on the health and well-being of the babies. Besides her, the whole ward was waiting for him. The doctors and patients were wondering what would happen next. Before their eyes, a miracle was happening, as if the audience fell into some movie, where a rich prince takes under the guardianship of a simple girl. And at the end of the story, that John and Sarah, as if did not notice the curious looks, they were absorbed in communication with each other and with the two little babies, which for a couple of days managed to recover and with surprise studied the world around them. John handed her a bank card and a brand new smartphone. Here, as promised. There should be enough there, so don't deny yourself anything. And if you need more, I'll give you some. Just tell me. Our employees receive money twice a month. Payments can be tracked by messages in your phone. I don't even know how to thank you, Sarah was embarrassed. Sometimes I feel like I'm dreaming. It makes me want to pinch myself. Come on, it doesn't cost me much, John said, and people need to be helped. Besides, you and I are already friends, aren't we? Wait till I'm godfather to your boys. By the way, what did you name them? John and Michael, Sarah replied. One in your honor, the other after my dad. He died early, but he was a good father. Thank you. It's my pleasure, John cheered. Okay, I've got to go now. Take care of yourself. I'll come again tomorrow. He said goodbye to the rest of his roommates and walked out, and a crowd of curious people gathered around Sarah again. Sarah, if it's no secret, how much did you get on your card? One of them inquired. I haven't looked yet, Sarah admitted. She picked up her phone, opened the message from the bank, and was stunned. The women came over and peered at the smartphone screen as well. They were filled with curiosity. All were amazed at John's generosity. Wow, that's what I mean. With this money, how much can one live comfortably? Oh, lucky you, Sarah, you got such a great guy, sighed one of the women in labor. Is he married, by the way? I don't know, Sarah sighed and grimaced. In truth, she liked John, of course, but she was afraid to show it, thinking he would see her as a money hunter. And what kind of hunter am I? Thought Sarah Smith with 2 children. But the thought that John might be married made her a little sad. The wardmates noticed this and silently went to their seats. They wanted the poor girl to be happy. Sarah's worries were justified. While John was visiting her in the hospital, Christine was met in one of the restaurants by Marina, the wife of Mike, John's business assistant, the same one who had been making a list of necessary items for Sarah and her children. Why are you out alone without your fiancé? Marina asked. You don't know yet? I left him. Let him bite his elbows now. Who needs him like that? Business nowadays is average, replied Christina. You shouldn't talk about his business like that. Mike said their company is doing well. They got a big order recently. Maybe their luck turned around after that noble deed, Marina informed him. What noble deed? Christina inquired, intrigued by her ex-fiance's sudden career rise. Poor thing, your John gave birth right in his brand new car. Can you believe it? Twins were born, and he visits her every day. Her name is Sarah. I think Marina smiled. Those are his kids. Christina switched to shouting. Why are you yelling? John said the kids aren't his. And it was the first time he'd seen them at all. There you are, you bad girl. Martha was taken aback and walked away, fearing Jessica's tantrums, for which the spoiled rich girl was famous throughout the city. Jessica's inflamed brain was already drawing lewd pictures of John and the stranger. And whose children are they then, if not his? Pissed off badly. Ah, it's Sarah. You turned out to be trickier than me. But the arrogant Jessica could not tolerate such humiliation. So she rushed to the maternity ward to sort things out. Which one of you is Sarah? She shouted as she burst into the room. It's me, Sarah replied. You poor wretched beggar, determined to steal my fiancé away from me. You think you bore him your ugly babies and you're happy. You're such a wretch. Try to come near him. I'll strangle you, yelled the furious bride. My children are not ugly and he is not their father. Get out of here, please, Sarah exclaimed weepingly. I'm not beating off anyone's fiancé. If you don't get out of here yourself, you're on your own. What do you know who my father is? He'd put your kids in an orphanage and you in jail. He'll find something to put you away for. Do you understand me, you thief of other men's men? Get out of here. You died in the wool czar. One of the laboring women got up from the bed and threateningly started to step on Jessica. Are you scaring our babies? Leave her alone, or you'll be out of here upside down, you prairie chicken. Jessica hadn't expected such a rebuff and backed away, looking around like a wounded animal. Slamming the door, Anna ran crying down the hall, escorted by the mocking glances of the staff. On the day of the discharge, John went to pick up Sarah and the children from the maternity hospital. The apartment for them was fully prepared and stocked with everything they needed. He bought flowers and treats for the nursing staff and everyone on the ward. John walked towards the ward with a joyful face. And Sarah's not here, the roommates said. She's gone. Gone how? Where John's hands dropped from this unexpected news. Yeah, some crazy blonde girl came by and insulted her in every way possible. Threatened her with jail. So Sarah ran away for good. Good thing we talked her into taking your bank card. Otherwise the girl would have disappeared, the old midwife complained. So where can we find her? It's a big city, John said, clutching his head. I think I know who frightened Sarah. The women just shrugged. Why did you hurt Sarah? Who gave you the right to act like that? Jessica had never seen John so furious before. That's how you'll know how to fend off other people's suitors, Jessica said capriciously. What fiances? I was just trying to help her out. Besides, you're kind of not my fiancé. Have you forgotten that you dumped me? I'm poor, ugly to you, John resented her. Whose kids are the kids then? Jessica asked snidely. How would I know? John exclaimed. It's none of my business. Are you out of your mind to suspect me? I've never cheated on you. God, I'm so glad I didn't propose to you that day. Maybe it was for the best that my car got towed, and I was late for the restaurant. Sorry, Bunny. Jessica replaced anger with mercy when she realized she was losing such a lucrative party. You know I have my reasons for acting like this too. Hormones are playing up. Pregnant women are always like that. What pregnant women? Are you pregnant? John wondered. Yeah, that's why I'm freaking out. I'm not happy with myself. Without blushing, Jessica dialed it up on the spot. That's news, John exclaimed. Well, it's something to celebrate. Come on, I want champagne, the most expensive kind, said Jessica. But you can't have champagne, he said. Why is that? Pouted the girl. It's because alcohol is contraindicated for pregnant women. John marveled at such ignorance. Right in, I'd forgotten all about it. See, it's good to have you, she sang softly. After spending the evening with Jessica, John reflected. He was certainly excited about the baby, but he didn't see Jessica as his wife. He felt in his gut that she wasn't right for him, and if he married her, his life would be a nightmare. This thought John shared with his father, Stephen Gregory, who from what he heard came just furious. I don't even think about leaving Jessica. She's the daughter of my main business partner. You will marry her and he and I will merge. Our capitals will become a powerful corporation, and Jessica's expecting my grandson. If you don't do as I say, I'll disinherit you. And it's too late to back down. You should have used your head. We don't abandon pregnant women and children, the father decided. All right, Dad, I'll do it. Schedule the wedding in 3 months, John sighed. That's good, Stephen Gregory soothed. Too bad your mother didn't live to see that day. John spent the next 2 months secretly trying to find Sarah, but his attempts were fruitless. Sarah had vanished into thin air. Jessica became even more capricious, speculating on a false pregnancy, which sometimes drove him mad. Rejoiced only one Stephen Gregory and spoiled the future daughter-in-law in every possible way. He even ordered for the future grandson of an expensive children's electric car, which were to be delivered from abroad. But time passed, and Jessica's belly did not grow, which worried the future father. John had already managed to study a ton of books on pregnancy and childbirth, and Jessica, to his surprise, wasn't interested. When's your ultrasound appointment? He asked his fiancée one day. I'll go with you. They should already be able to see the arms, legs. It's so interesting, and I've got a lot of questions piling up for the doctor in a week, Jessica muttered. That evening, the pregnant woman called her friend, telling her of her problem. What am I going to do? How am I going to tell John the first not pregnant? He's going to leave me right away, Jessica hysterical. I have a miscarriage. It's a piece of cake. If you want, I can help you. I have a doctor I know. He owes my husband a lot of money. He'll make us a miscarriage certificate, and you'll pay the debt for him, advised her friend. Wow, you're a genius, Jessica exclaimed. It looked like she had been saved. Her mood improved immediately, and she poured herself an impressive glass of red wine to celebrate the deed. And the next morning our cheater went to the corrupt doctor, who arranged everything just right. The case was in the bag. All that remained was to present the news of the miscarriage in such a way as to frighten the gullible John and finally knock him out. Unsuspecting, John sat at his desk and studied the documents. A worried secretary walked in. John Stevens, she said fearfully, looking at her boss. The hospital here called to say that your fiancée has had a miscarriage. She is physically in satisfactory condition, but psychologically unstable. Jessica requests that you come for her immediately. How awful, exclaimed an astonished John. So let's go to the hospital immediately. Wait a minute, though. While you're waiting for the driver from lunch, you could be gone 100 times over. I'll drive myself. John ran out of the office. He didn't wait for the elevator, but went down the emergency stairs, jumping over a step. How could this be? His child was dead, and Jessica must be killing herself with grief. He should be there for her. John, taking his keys out of his pocket on the run, jumped out of the underground parking garage door like a scalded man. After scaring the security guard enough, he didn't remember how he'd ended up on the highway. His SUV was speeding away. Scary images of helpless Jessica and dead babies flashed through John's mind. Tears of grief filled his eyes. He had dreamed of being a father. John didn't notice how he drove into the oncoming lane, overtaking an elderly driver in an old car. But the road was too slippery after the rain, and John was too excited to see the dangerous turn in time. John woke up in a hospital bed. His head and back were hurting badly. A catheter had been placed in his arm, from which a thin tube stretched. A device was beeping nastily next to it. John wanted to sit up, but he couldn't. His legs wouldn't obey him. Not only that, he couldn't feel them at all. "Lie still, patient," the nurse said. Then she turned toward the corridor and shouted, "Doctor, he's awake." "Hello, John." An elderly doctor with glasses looked at the man. "Well, congratulations are in order. Looks like you were born with your shirt on. The car's dented and you're relatively okay. You're a lucky man." The doctor tried to make a joke. "What do you mean I'm fine?" "I can't feel my legs," John said fearfully. "That's the way it should be right now." "But unfortunately not," replied the doctor. "Your legs are inoperative because of the spinal injury. Things should get better after the surgery, but the procedure can only be performed after the body as a whole has recovered. The main thing is that his arms, legs, and head are in place, because, it happens that victims are brought in pieces. The main thing is not to worry, get plenty of rest. It's important now," and the doctor left, leaving orders for the nurse. Soon my father came into the room. His face looked aged and frightened, and there was an addition of gray hair on his head. "Son, I thought I was going to lose you like Mom. What happened? Why were you so driven?" Stephen Gregory asked. "I got word that Jessica had a miscarriage. I was upset and rushed to see her," replied John. The thought of losing his baby made his chest ache. "While you were in a coma, that Jessica of yours found a new suitor and was hanging out with him at nightclubs. She doesn't look like she's grieving for her child. It's entirely possible she had us both fooled. Looks like there was no pregnancy. I had my people take a good look at the doctor who drew a miscarriage on her certificate, and he admitted that he was acting on her orders. Jessica was really after the money, not you. I've completely severed all relations with their family. Those bruises didn't look like they were going to go away that quickly. There's no guarantee her father won't let me down in business too. That bastard hasn't even apologized or visited you once. She's the reason you're here and you could be crippled forever." Stephen Gregory clutched his heart when he heard his father's words. John had lost all interest in life. His eyes dimmed and his face became stony. "How come there are people around who don't understand me?" John thought. "Everyone wants something from me." John no longer cared where he was, what he ate, or what was happening to him. He didn't care about his health at all. That's why he flatly refused any treatments, including physical therapy and exercises. John was always silent, never reacting to anyone. Even when he was brought home, where close friends and colleagues gathered to meet him, he did not care. He sat slumped in his wheelchair with a detached face. A month passed. It was time to prepare for surgery. Stephen Gregory, of course, was most worried about his son's fate. "The doctors say you should do special exercises. It will help you overcome post-operative complications," the father said. "I don't want to. I don't see the point. I'll do just fine as I am. No one wanted me healthy, and they didn't want me disabled," John replied despondently. Stephen Gregory saw how depressed he was. His father had hired the best therapists for him, but they had all failed. John simply refused to communicate with them. They had over a dozen professional caregivers with medical degrees, but they never lasted more than a week. John's temper had completely deteriorated. No one could endure his caustic remarks and refusal to obey the worker for long. "Take care of your son yourself," shouted the last of the nurses, whom John had pissed off. "You've completely lost your minds. I'm not your slave. I'm not going to take this kind of treatment," and left, slamming the door. Rumors of a harmful invalid quickly spread in the narrow circles of medical workers, and no one else wanted to care for John at any price. This function fell to Stephen Gregory and the elderly housekeeper, who already had a lot to do around the house. Desperate to find a decent caregiver, John's father placed an ad in the local newspaper. There were a lot of applicants, elderly grandmothers who needed care themselves, dashing-looking girls with colorful makeup, and heavy drinkers who could barely stand on their feet, and even a homeless man. Stephen Gregory was quick to turn them all away. One day there was a loud knock at their house. On the threshold stood a modest, pretty woman, who at first sight inspired Stephen Gregory trust, and he invited her into the house. "Hello, are you the one looking for a nurse for a sick man?" she asked. "I don't have a medical degree, but I took care of my grandmother. I can give injections, perform hygiene procedures, feed, take walks, and fill leisure time so that the person is not bored. But I won't be able to stay here overnight for family reasons. Here's my resume, take a look." "Good afternoon. I'm so glad you responded. I think you'd be a good fit for us. Come on, I'll introduce you to my son. He's 30 years old, and he's a good man. Only nervous because of his illness." Stephen Gregory was so pleased to see the nurse that he forgot to ask her name. He knocked on the door leading to John's room. "Who else is there? What do you want?" came the angry voice of Stephen Gregory. The nurse came into the room. When John saw her, he froze with shock at first, and then tears came to his eyes. "Sarah, have you come? I've been looking for you. Where have you been?" Sarah had and ran over to John. She sat down on her knees in front of his chair and began to feel his stiff legs. "Johnny, what's wrong? Can't you walk? How can you?" Anna exclaimed and cried. When Stephen Gregory saw his son's face partly clear, he breathed a sigh of relief. "How do you know each other so well?" he asked. "It's a long story." Dad John finally smiled. "I'll tell you about it later sometime." For the first time in 3 months, he was in high spirits. His father decided not to disturb them, so he simply went to his room, ordering them to serve a dinner tonight. It was necessary to respect the long-awaited guest. "What a sumptuous table," marveled Sarah as she entered the dining room that evening with John, who was cheerfully spinning the wheels of his wheelchair. "It's to show how pleased we are with you." Sarah Stephen Gregory perked up. "Thank you." "It's a pleasure," she rejoiced. "It's even kind of embarrassing to take money from you now." "You go ahead, don't make it up," John replied. "You need the money. I don't need you changing my pants for free. Every labor should be paid for. Especially labor like this, okay? I won't argue. Just don't you worry, John," Sarah said worriedly. "You're not supposed to worry before surgery. Or have you forgotten what we agreed? So did you agree to the operation?" Stephen asked Gregory excitedly. "Of course we need to get back on our feet quickly," John said, and looked at Sarah, who was squeezing his hand tightly. Stephen Gregory realized that his son liked her and was a beneficial influence on him. That reassured him. A mild infatuation never hurt anyone, yet he thought, and invited everyone to the table. While John was busy working on his health, Jessica had managed to dump another beau who she thought was unworthy of her. Finding out that John was on the mend and that the hated Sarah was living next door to him in his house, jealous Jessica decided to get back at them. She took a pen and a piece of paper and wrote an anonymous letter stating that Sarah was a dangerous adventuress and wealth hunter who had gotten John pregnant on purpose a year ago and bore him twins, and now she is going to become the mistress of the house and the whole business. And Stephen Gregory himself, Sarah plans to give him to a nursing home to keep him out of the way. The next morning, the letter was sent by courier to Stephen Gregory. Upon reading the anonymous letter, the father was furious. He stormed into Sarah's room. "Is it true that you had children with John?" he asked angrily, glaring his eyes. "Yes, it just so happened," Sarah replied calmly. "Maybe you also like my son?" he asked wryly. "Yes," she admitted honestly. "But John doesn't know anything about it, so that's why you came here, to marry him off," Stephen yelled. "I wanted our money, eh? You'll get by." "That's what I just came to work," exclaimed Sarah. "Get out of my house." And Stephen Gregory pointed to the door. Sarah was not allowed to say goodbye to John. There was nothing left for her to do but leave this house. "Where's Sarah?" John asked when he arrived in his wheelchair for breakfast. "I kicked her out," said his father. "What do you want that Anashenko for? There's no need for us to get inbred with her yet." "Oh, really?" John exclaimed. "You've got yourself a baron, and you have no right to control other people's destinies. You once asked me to marry Jessica. And how did that turn out? Look what happened to me." John took offense and went off to the garden near the house. His father remained seated at the table, reading the letter. Half an hour later, he went to apologize to his son and confess that perhaps he had believed the anonymous letter for nothing. But he didn't find John. A search was organized in the street, and even the police were involved. But the stroller tracks broke off on the road. "What have I done?" "You old fool," Stephen Gregory clutched his head and cried. In the evening, he found Sarah's resume where she had left her address, and the next morning he went there. The house was on the very edge of town. Stephen Gregory knocked on the door. He was opened by an elderly landlady who immediately realized who stood before her. The Smith family. All the details of their life were known to everyone in town. The grandmother nodded silently at the room where Sarah and the children were seated. "What do you want?" she asked when she saw the offending man enter. Stephen Gregory was silent. He couldn't find the words, an apology. Besides, his gaze was fixed on two chubby-cheeked babies who were walking amusingly while lying in a crib. "How cute," he said as he approached the children. "I'd forgotten how beautiful babies can be. I'm getting old. I've forgotten how it was when I was young. I've lost my head for business." "I'm sorry," Sarah snapped at you. "I got an anonymous letter with all sorts of nasty things written about you, so I freaked out. I hurt your feelings. I didn't know what I was talking about. So you had a baby. You had a baby with your son. It's not my business. My business is to provide a decent life for my grandchildren." "All right," she smiled. "But these are not your grandchildren. They're from my fiancée, who's long gone, and John just helped me when I was in dire need. You raised a decent man. I'm the one who should be thanking you for him." When Sarah told the details of her life, Stephen Gregory was ashamed. "Who took care of the little ones while you were working here?" asked Grandma Martha, the landlady. "I owe her a great deal," said Sarah. So that's it, pack up with the kids and back to our place of permanent residence. I've got some not so good news though. My John is missing. He went off somewhere in a wheelchair. Never came back, said Stephen Gregory. Missing how? Sarah said worriedly. We have to find him, don't we? What if something happened to him? What if he needs help? What kind of wheelchair-bound invalid are you talking about? Grandma Martha heard everything and decided to cut into the conversation. Isn't it a young man with black hair and a red jacket? Yes, that's him, Stephen and Sarah shouted in unison. So he's staying with Peter, our vagabond. He's so clever. He's got a new tenant. He fixed Peter's television. Yesterday I took the iron to him for repair. Now the iron works as good as new. Sarah ran out into the yard first. Stephen Gregory could hardly keep up with her when they burst into the old shack, not without a knock. Out of breath from running, they found John alive and well. He was sitting there fixing an old electric stove. How did you frighten me, John? Father exclaimed. So you almost gave your father a heart attack, Sarah said menacingly. Well, how can you be such a slacker? You've got surgery coming up. We were worried you'd drive us crazy, Dad said. Sarah, hold me, or I won't serve him now. John laughed loudly and happily. He realized that his two favorite people had found common ground, and it made him happy. Yeah, I want to go home, he said. Where are John and Alex? They're home. They're being looked after. Don't worry, Sarah reassured him. As they walked noisily into Stephen's house, Anna, the housekeeper, splashed her hands together. She was delighted to see the sullen house come alive again. Sarah had allocated the brightest, warmest rooms for the little ones. John personally supervised all the preparations. The father rejoiced at his son's transformation. When evening came and John was playing with the children, Sarah quietly approached Stephen Gregory and hugged him. Thank you for everything, Stephen Gregory, Sarah whispered softly. I'll tell you a secret. John asked me to marry him, and I said yes. Now that's news. Call me Daddy, Sarah Stephen Gregory said affectionately. A few months later, John was already moving around the house, albeit with a stick, but on his own 2 feet, and gave instructions to a team of workers who were building a warm gazebo in a garden for winter walks with the kids. The operation was a success. In addition, the problem was not as serious as the doctors had feared. That's why John recovered quite quickly. They had the wedding right at the manor house. They didn't invite many guests. They invited only close friends and relatives. The young people were happy. There were good wishes, loud toasts, and of course shouts of bitter. In the midst of the festivities, Jessica showed up uninvited. She was no longer that beautiful girl, but looked depressed and devastated. Everyone fell silent, expecting a trick from the self-loving girl. What insolence was heard from all sides. How dare she come here? I apologize for disturbing your idyll, Jessica said with her head down. I came to apologize to all of you. John, Sarah, I sincerely wish you happiness. Forgive me if you can. Jessica held a small, neatly wrapped gift in her hands, which she placed with trembling hands with the rest of the presentations. John looked disdainfully at her offering. He wanted nothing from the one who had caused his family so much pain. The vow of silence was interrupted by Sarah. She was the one who knew better than anyone what it was like to be a social outcast. Jessica, I don't know about John, but I forgive you. Today is such a happy day, and I don't want to overshadow it. Thank you for the gift. It takes courage to do that, to admit your mistakes. Come on in, make yourself at home. You know everything here better than I do, and Sarah smiled. Jessica, not expecting this kind of participation, cried openly. It was as if something in her soul had burst and the dam of accumulated shame and grief had burst. It was clear that something very bad had happened in her life. Sarah came out from behind the desk and put her arms around her, pulling her close. Come on, are you going to tell us everything? She said quietly and pulled Jessica with her. She didn't resist. Obediently, she followed Sarah, realizing that she could get help here. As much as John didn't want to see his ex-fiancée, her state of mind shook him, and he agreed to listen to her. After drinking some soothing drops, Jessica began to pour out her soul. My father died suddenly of a heart attack a month ago, she began her story. My mom and I were left all alone. The company's fortunes began to deteriorate because of my father's departure. Investors were afraid to cooperate with us. And then Victor appeared, our savior. I trusted him. He courted me so nicely, said he was a top manager of a big company. He drove an expensive car, gave me luxurious gifts. My mother loved him and wanted him for a son-in-law. Our house was open to him at any time of day. And then Vitya offered to sell the company and invest all my father's money in cryptocurrencies. He promised that now it was growing in value and you could make a lot of money on the difference when reselling it. I transferred all the money to the right wallet, just like he said. I trusted him. And the next day Victor disappeared, moved out of the hotel, and his phone was unavailable. We realized Victor was a fraud. Turns out he even had a rented suit. He robbed us blind. My mom and I had our house foreclosed on. I still have some money left in my account, but it'll be gone soon, and they won't hire me anywhere. They say I don't have experience. That scoundrel, and Jessica showed a photo of her boyfriend on her phone. It's to die for Sarah couldn't help herself. So this is my ex-fiancé Vitya, who swindled the last of my money and ran away when he found out I was pregnant. Now that's a coincidence. Yes, you and I, Jessica, are now unfortunate friends. By the way, I know where he might be holed up. I heard an address he gave to a cab driver once. Let's see if we can get your money back. In the meantime, stay with your mom at our place. I think there's plenty of room for everyone. Can't we just stay friends? I don't have any real girlfriends, Jessica said. And believe me, I've changed. I know what it's like to have no money and rich people looking at you funny. What kind of a fool was I to act like that? You certainly were, Sarah smiled. And they laughed. And then they talked for a long time about something. A strong friendship was budding between them. John decided not to disturb them and went to see his sons, whom he missed very much. The next morning, Jessica wrote a police report on Victor and attached a photo of the fraudster and bank statements to the case file. For his part, John involved an experienced detective. Together, they found Victor's trail. And in time, he was already processing the next victim. The money was returned to Jessica. She was happy and bought for her mother and herself a small, cozy house, already much more modest than it was. John, will you let me be your business partner? You're the one I want to entrust the remaining capital to, Jessica asked. Deal. Partner John smiled and looked at his ex-fiancée. He no longer resented her. Jessica had really changed, becoming softer in character and easier to talk to. In addition, her favorite friend Sarah had a positive influence on her. Every evening, John hurried home from work, where his large family was waiting for him. One evening, Peter greeted him and continued trimming the bushes. He was the same hobo who had picked up a freezing John by the roadside when he had run away from home. Peter proved to be an excellent gardener. The garden had been transformed by his arrival. Well done, Peter John said. By the way, your house is almost ready. You can move in a couple of days. As soon as John stepped on the threshold of the house, Caesar came running toward him. On his neck hung a note. The dog wagged his tail and spun around happily, so John had to do his best to get the strange message away from him. When John unfolded the note, he saw the words that every loving man dreams of. You're going to be a daddy again soon. And in the dining room, there was a large family waiting for him. A happy father, a wife, 2 sons, a faithful dog, and someone else whose arrival everyone was eagerly awaiting.